Shuji had no family name. His name consisted of one word alone, and that single word was the only thing he truly possessed. Yet, no one had ever called him by it. As a child, others had mocked him and branded him with names such as trash. When he grew older, they replaced the insult with weed and later, bastard. By the time he reached adulthood, he was feared and given titles that reflected his deadly skill: venomous snake spear and spear demon. Eventually, after countless victories, he earned the grand title of Spear King. His life had never known comfort. His clothing had been nothing more than rags, and his daily sustenance had consisted of a single potato ration. But he had accepted it all, because the battlefield had been the only place he could call home. Now, as he stood before a new set of enemies, he listened to their frightened whispers. Some called him a monster. Others declared that he was not even human but a demon. One among them recognized him and stammered, wondering aloud if he was the rumored Spear King. Their fear mixed with desperation as they reminded one another that they had strength in numbers and that victory would be theirs the moment they killed him. At their cry, they charged as one. The instant their blades closed in, Shuji's figure vanished. In the next moment, he appeared above them, soaring through the air. His spear thrust downward, piercing through an opponent's head in a single strike. As the victim collapsed, another enemy cursed him and screamed for his death. Shuji's thoughts echoed within. He wondered whether his ability to kill had been something he was born with, or something he had learned over time. In the end, the truth mattered little. What remained was that he had taken countless lives with nothing but a single spear. Though he had always survived, the resentment of the dead had followed him endlessly. Shuji, once the boy who had been scorned as trash, had ultimately perished on the battlefield. That should have been the end of his story. But fate, or perhaps an error in the order of things, changed his path. Shuji, whose body should have decayed among the forgotten, was instead reincarnated. On a bright sunny day, Shuji found himself alive again. He sat beneath a tree, staring at his hands in silence. He realized with surprise that he had not been reborn as an infant but instead as a teenager. Catching sight of a discarded mirror on the ground, he studied his reflection and confirmed his appearance. He thought back to the days when he had still worked humbly as a hand helper. In the distance, shouts of conflict drew his attention. Shuji turned and saw a battle unfolding between the forest bandits and the Howling Tiger Escort Bureau. The clash was fierce. The escorts shouted to one another, vowing to protect the goods at all costs. Bandits cursed them and fought with equal determination. Shuji observed quietly from the shadows, his inner voice remarking that it was ironic for his first sight after reincarnation to be yet another battlefield. Suddenly, a voice called out from behind him. A bandit had noticed him and sneered, asking what a brat like him was doing there. He doubted Shuji was an escort master and assumed instead that he must be nothing more than a hand helper. Shuji turned his cold eyes upon him. He recognized the man instantly as one of the forest bandits, the type of scoundrel who lurked in forests to ambush and rob travelers. Yet, despite his bravado, the bandit's trembling eyes and rigid body betrayed his fear. Shuji thought to himself that most of these bandits were amateurs. The bandit shouted that it did not matter whether Shuji was a helper or a master, because he was part of the escort bureau regardless. Roaring his intent to kill, the man swung his spear wildly. Shuji, however, evaded the attack with effortless precision. Calmly, he observed that the enemy's movements were far too predictable. He seized the weapon, shifted his body swiftly, and drove the spear into the man's body. As the bandit fell in disbelief, Shuji spoke aloud. Although his former war feats had been erased with his rebirth, his martial arts remained intact. That much was enough for him. The truth, however, lay heavier on his mind. Shuji recalled that others had despised the martial arts technique he used, condemning it as demonic. Yet, in his current situation, he had no choice but to rely on it. He left the dying man skewered on the spear and began to walk away casually. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted as another bandit leaped from hiding, attacking with a bow and arrow. The shaft struck Shuji in the head, and the bandit burst into laughter, declaring that his enemy was finished and that at last, he himself could live. But his laughter froze when Shuji surged forward, very much alive, glaring at him with deadly menace. Shuji informed him coldly that he had already anticipated an ambush. He chastised the fool for not confirming his enemy's death, reminding him that such carelessness would always be fatal on a battlefield. With that, Shuji's spear pierced through him, ending his life instantly. Hoisting his weapon, Shuji now carried the weight of 2 dead men skewered upon his spear. He remarked that the weight finally felt right. As he looked upon the Howling Tiger Escort Bureau struggling against the bandits, he thought back fondly to his days of old. With measured steps, he walked into the battlefield, the corpses swaying heavily from his weapon. The sight stunned both bandits and escorts alike. Whispers spread in terror. Some asked in disbelief what kind of man he was. Others insisted he could not be human. Their panic only deepened when their leader appeared. The bandit leader announced his presence with a booming voice, declaring himself the head of the forest bandits. Shuji smiled in anticipation, amused at the prospect of testing his strength against him. The leader, in turn, grinned and promised to wipe the smile from Shuji's face before hurling a massive axe in his direction. Shuji evaded the attack easily, his movements so casual that it mocked the effort. Furious, the bandit leader shouted again, calling him a rat for dodging. Yet his confidence shattered when Shuji hurled a dead body toward him. Shuji noted calmly that while the man's physical strength was impressive, it was the only quality he possessed. In a single decisive swing, Shuji cleaved him in half with his spear. His voice rang out clearly as he explained that this was what a true attack looked like. The onlookers gasped in horror. Some cried that he had slain their leader in one strike. Others murmured that he was a monster. Their fear spread like wildfire. Shuji, meanwhile, looked at his weapon and frowned. He complained that it still felt too light. To remedy the matter, he skewered the leader's bisected body onto the spear along with the others, remarking with satisfaction that the weight was finally balanced. Panic overtook the surviving bandits. They broke ranks and fled in every direction, calling for retreat and screaming that the man before them was not human. Shuji, meanwhile, studied the corpses he carried, then smiled faintly as he understood. His inner thoughts whispered that when blood and demons met on the battlefield, they created what men feared most, the tricolored Dango Mountain bandits. Time itself had rewound by 10 years, and on that very mountain, the spear demon had returned. Shuji smiled once more and admitted to himself that it felt quite nice. One of the escort guards raised his voice and shouted for his men not to let a single bandit escape. The battle raged on in the background, the sound of weapons clashing and men screaming filling the air. The guards roared that the wind was on their side and insisted that they could not allow any of the bandits to live. In the middle of the chaos, Shuji stood motionless, his sharp eyes scanning the fight. Something nearby caught his attention, making him pause. A loud voice came from the battlefield, filled with arrogance and fury. The bandit yelled at the bounty hunters, asking who they thought they were to kill his men, and challenged them to face him directly if they dared. Shuji fixed his gaze on the man, realizing that this was no ordinary enemy. At that moment, the whispers of lingering spirits reached Shuji's ears. They revealed that the man fighting so fiercely was none other than Ego, their former leader. The spirits begged Shuji to bring him over to their side as well, insisting that their boss was strong. Shuji narrowed his eyes and acknowledged what he heard. He recognized that this man was indeed cut above the common rabble. When the spirits pressed him further, Shuji agreed, telling them that he would grant their wish. A cold grin spread across his face as he declared that Ego too would be devoured whole. Igo continued his wild assault against the escorts, laughing madly and swinging his weapon as he cried out for them to die. But suddenly, a voice called his name. He froze for a moment and looked back in confusion, demanding to know who dared call him so casually. In that instant, Shuji struck. Igo barely managed to block the attack, the force of the blow sending him crashing to the ground. His eyes widened in shock as he coughed out his anger, demanding to know who Shuji was. Shuji did not answer. He simply stared in silence, his expression cold and unreadable. Ego was startled by his demeanor, muttering in disbelief at the sight before him. He realized with horror that Shuji was hanging a man off his spear. The spirits of the fallen bandits called out again, asking Ego why he alone was left alive and beckoning him to come over to them. Hearing his name repeated by their ghostly voices, Igo broke down in terror. Tears streamed from his eyes as he screamed, calling Shuji a demon and begging for help. The spirits whispered once more, urging him to come together with them. Before Ego could escape his fate, Shuji moved in one swift motion and severed his head. The lifeless body fell, and Shuji looked down at him with cold detachment. Within his thoughts, Shuji reflected on the technique he had just used. He recalled that by calling a name 3 times, a soul could be sent to the underworld. During those 3 calls, the target would inevitably be drawn into the afterlife. He admitted to himself that it had been some time since he last used this technique. Memories of the past surged within him. It was deep into the night, among rocky mountains, when Shuji, as a young soldier, struggled to climb a steep cliff. His body was exhausted, his breath ragged as he cursed his misfortune. He shouted in frustration, complaining that as a rookie, he was forced to take on all the difficult scouting missions. When he finally pulled himself up onto a ledge, he sat down and panted heavily, muttering bitterly about the military. He remembered how they had promised him that if he joined, he would never starve. But the harsh reality was no different from his days as a slave. Then, something sinister crept up behind him. A menacing aura pressed down upon his back, and Shuji's eyes widened in alarm. His instincts screamed at him. His thoughts raced as he wondered what it could be. A tiger, perhaps, or a ghost. Whatever it was, he knew one thing for certain: he must not look back. He clenched his teeth, forcing himself not to turn, reminding himself over and over that to look would mean death. He swore he would not die in such a place for nothing. But then, the figure behind him spoke. Shuji froze, sweat pouring down his body as he listened. The voice questioned why he struggled so hard to survive when his life was worth no more than that of a bug. It asked why he did not gamble instead, suggesting that such a gamble might be the chance to change his miserable fate. Shuji's willpower faltered, and he finally turned to face the voice. He demanded to know why he should believe such words. Before him stood an old man, who laughed deeply at Shuji's defiance. The man asked for his name. Shuji hesitated, but after a moment, he answered, "Shuji." The old man leaned forward, asking what he had just said. Shuji raised his voice, repeating that his name was Shuji. The old man pressed further, asking one more time. Shuji nervously began to respond, but before he could finish, the old man moved with blinding speed. He lunged forward, crossing the distance in an instant, and seized Shuji by the throat. Shuji was slammed onto the ground, blood spilling from his mouth as he groaned in agony. His inner thoughts reeled in shock at the man's speed, realizing he could not even perceive the movement. The old man's voice was cold and commanding. He told Shuji that if there was someone he wanted to kill, he should ask their name 3 times. Regardless of their answer, this method would allow him to kill anyone. In that moment, Shuji understood. This man was the one who had bestowed him with demonic power, his master. He realized with dread that this man was none other than Kokufu, the blood demon, the embodiment of evil within the martial world. The memory faded, and Shuji returned to the present, his spear cutting down bandits without pause. Amid the carnage, he noted something strange. His mind felt clearer than ever before. He reflected that the demonic power Kokufu had given him was incomplete. The seed of demonic energy rooted in his dantian was meant to corrupt his bones and cloud his mind. Yet now he felt sharper than ever. He concentrated and ran his aura through his body. Then, he realized the truth. In his past life, he had forgotten all about it after joining the army. But as a child, he had once learned the Miao tribe's breathing technique. That technique now allowed him to preserve his consciousness and maintain his clarity, despite harboring demonic power. He thought to himself that it was a strange coincidence. His master's words echoed in his mind. Until he completely mastered the demonic power, he would never be able to hold on to his sanity. Shuji smirked faintly as he wondered what kind of expression Kokufu would make if he discovered this secret. Then, a voice called out from behind. Shuji turned and saw the escorts of the Howling Tiger Escort Bureau. They thanked him sincerely for saving them from such a dangerous situation. Standing in front of the group was a young woman. She looked at Shuji with caution and awe, her thoughts racing. She knew it. Even while standing still, the pressure radiating from him was overwhelming. He had cut down the bandits one after another with terrifying ease. She decided firmly that she could not let him slip away. Shuji asked bluntly what it was she wanted. The girl admitted that she did not know why someone like him was working as a mere convoy hand in their bureau, but she asked if he would be willing to continue lending them his strength. Shuji refused without hesitation. His quick rejection left the girl stammering in shock. She tried to stop him, but he turned away and told her that if she had no other business, he would be leaving. Inside, her resolve hardened. She thought that she could not simply let him walk away. If he would not join them willingly, then she would just have to secure him another way. She pulled something from her pocket and held it out. It was a golden token. She explained that it bore the seal of the Tiger Pit sect, a prestigious sect based in Anhui that oversaw their enforcement bureau. With this token, he would be welcomed as an honored guest. She begged him to accept it as a sign of her sincerity. Shuji looked down at the token. Inscribed on it were the words, Tiger Pit Sect First Class Escort, Shu Eika. He paused for a moment as a memory stirred within him. He recalled that the Tiger Pit Sect was known for their honest and upright operations. Yet he also knew that within a few years, the sect would vanish without a trace, a tragic fate awaiting them. He accepted the token. Shu Eika smiled warmly and thanked him. She told him that they would return to their transport duties, but once they were finished, they would come back to greet him again. She and her group bowed respectfully before leaving. Shuji casually took one of their horses, announcing that he would be borrowing it. Shu Eika panicked and tried to warn him not to use that particular animal, explaining that its temperament was too wild and they had decided to keep it only for hauling cargo. Yet Shuji mounted it with ease. The horse obeyed him completely. One of the escorts watched in disbelief, muttering that the beast had suddenly become obedient. To everyone's shock, the horse relieved itself as it walked, as though submitting to Shuji's authority. Both Shu Eika and the escorts gasped in astonishment. Shu Eika let out a sigh. She muttered that at his age, to have such skill in horseback riding on top of everything else, he truly was a monster. Another escort guard teased her, suggesting that perhaps this was love at first sight, as Shuji was strong, handsome, and exactly her type. Her eyes sharpened, and she drew her sword, glaring at the man menacingly. She accused him of being rude to their benefactor and demanded to know if he had a death wish. The terrified guard stammered apologies, insisting he was only joking. She finally sheathed her sword. Her expression grew serious as she confided to her men what she had observed. She explained that she had seen his spear technique with her own eyes. One of the escorts guessed that he might be the son of a famous noble family that specialized in the spear, but Shu Eika shook her head. She explained that it was not martial arts but military spear technique. Furthermore, his level of mastery and insight was far beyond his years. Another guard gasped, asking if she truly meant what he thought. Shu Eika nodded. She reasoned that most likely, Shuji was the son of a powerful military family, traveling on a warrior's journey after completing his training. She noted his personality, the way he had risked his life to save them. She was certain that if he learned of their sect's crisis, there was no way he would ignore it. Inwardly, Shu Eika pleaded. She begged silently for Shuji to save the Tiger Pit sect from the clutches of the Black Dao sect. Meanwhile, Shuji spoke to the horse in irritation, warning that if it dared to relieve itself again, he would cut it so badly it would never be able to do so again. His mind drifted back to the sect. He muttered to himself, wondering how the Tiger Pit sect was faring at this point in time. Then, he thought of a certain man. Aiku. He wondered how that man was doing now. Shuji recalled the first time he had met Ko Aiku, the person who had become his first true bond after joining the army in his past life. He had been the one who stood by him as a comrade, a sworn sibling, the only one who shared his fate. The memory surged vividly. Back then, Shuji had been just a fresh recruit. One day, as he tried to eat, a senior soldier had kicked him aside, shouting at him for daring to eat without offering tribute. The man explained harshly that new recruits were required to hand over their meals to seniors. Failure to comply would only result in a beating. Shuji, confused, had responded that he had never heard of such a rule. Before the bully could press further, another voice had cut in. It was Ko Eiko. He had scoffed at the ridiculous hierarchy and remarked that since Shuji was new, that technically made him the next newest. If the rule were real, then logically his rations should also be taken. He asked mockingly if the bully planned on taking his as well. Enraged, the man lunged at him, threatening to smash his face in. But before his fist could land, a potato struck him squarely in the head. Koeiku had hurled it with precision, and when the man reeled in pain, he had taunted him to eat it and fill his stomach if he had any teeth left. Then, without hesitation, he charged forward, raining blows on him until his face was bruised and swollen. With each punch, he shouted that if he still had the audacity to return for more, He would happily knock out every last tooth in his mouth. The bully could only groan in defeat. Shuji, still stunned, had told him he should not have interfered, but Aiku brushed off his concern, declaring firmly that survival required strength, and that meant eating without surrender. With that, he had tossed another potato to him. That was how they first met. From then on, Shuji considered him not just a fellow soldier, but a comrade, no, a sworn sibling bound by fate. Aiku had introduced himself as Ko-Aiku and asked for his name. Shuji had given it after a brief hesitation. Time moved forward. One day, while desperately struggling to survive on the battlefield, disaster struck. A demonic being named Ko-Kufu had appeared, seizing Shuji by the neck at the edge of a cliff. Aiku had cried out in panic, threatening to fire a flare unless Shuji was released. Shuji, choking, had urged him to run, but Kofu mocked them both. With a cold grin, he released Shuji, sending him plunging down the cliffside. Aiku had screamed his name in anguish, but by sheer luck, Shuji managed to cling to a ledge below. He shouted back, urging him not to waste the flare and to escape while he still could. Kofu, however, was not finished. He stated calmly that he did not intend to kill Shuji yet. Instead, he had a proposal. If they brought him an herb capable of healing his internal wounds, he would grant them the strength to survive. The two looked at each other in silence. Shuji's inner voice admitted that they had no choice but to accept. When they agreed, Kufu seemed satisfied, remarking that they at least had determination in their eyes. Later, Kofu began teaching them about his secret art. He explained that there were beings called unrestrained demons, souls of humans consumed by tigers and corrupted into demonic servitude. These corrupted souls offered others as sacrifices to elevate their master's spiritual rank. His demonic technique mirrored this principle, absorbing the grudges of the dead to raise one's rank. The technique was called the Art of the Unrestrained Demon, and it had 3 stages: compression, tempering, and transcendence, each consisting of 10 levels. At the first stage, compression, one could emit demonic energy like steam. In the second, tempering, the practitioner's blood became poisonous, spurting like crimson mist when released. Beyond that lay the final transcendence stage, which Kofu himself had reached, advancing 4 levels into it. He declared that concepts like good, evil, and even demonic had lost meaning to him then. He urged them to etch his teachings into their hearts. To survive, they must go to battlefields and slaughter endlessly, feeding on grudges to change their destiny. Their next task, Kofu commanded, was to retrieve 100-year snow ginseng. Shuji immediately agreed, but Aiku protested, insisting that the herb was beyond their current capabilities. He requested instead that Kufu first help them open their Renandu meridians using the herbs they already had, so they would have the foundation to pursue stronger ingredients. Kofu, after considering, accepted his reasoning. Aiko insisted Shuji go first in opening his meridians. Shuji resisted, but he pressed him, saying that going second was always harder. They argued briefly, but in the end, they agreed, sealing their pact with a fist bump and the words, "Got it." But fate was cruel. Sometime later, Shuji staggered through the rain, his body pierced with arrows, leaving a trail of blood as he gasped for air. He clutched the herbs he had gathered, reassuring himself that everything would be fine now that his brother and master would be saved. But when he returned to the hideout, a thunderclap illuminated a shocking sight. Their master, Kofu, sat beheaded in his lotus position, his severed head lying in front of his body. Standing behind him, drenched in blood and holding a sword, was Aiko smiling faintly. Shuji dropped the hymns in horror and rushed to hold him as he collapsed. Trembling, he demanded to know what had happened. Aiko, his voice weak, explained that Kufu had never intended for them to live. He had acted first to prevent their deaths. Shuji realized in terror that all his meridians had been destroyed and his demonic energy drained away. Tears streamed down his face, but Aiku tried to soothe him, saying killing one half-dead old man was nothing. Then, with his final strength, he revealed his true identity. He was the last surviving member of the destroyed Tiger Pit sect. Shuji had once told him he served briefly in the Tiger Enforcement Bureau and that the sect's leaders were good people. Because he spoke fondly of his parents, he had come to see him as family. His voice trembled as he smiled. "I'm really glad I met you. If you ever get the chance, please, avenge me." The memory shattered. Back in the present, Shuji sat among the noise of a bustling place, His inner voice burned with determination. In this life, he vowed, that grudge would never exist. He would prevent the destruction of the Hu clan, and though he had already saved the Tiger Enforcement Bureau and their finances, it was not enough. He had to go further. He rode into Anhui, dismounted before a small manor, and approached a passerby. Politely, he asked a question, but the man struck him. Enraged at being spoken to so casually, Shuji swiftly overpowered him, beating him until the man was kneeling with swollen, blackened eyes. Demanding answers, Shuji asked if the manor ahead was the Tiger Pit sect. The man confirmed it was. Shuji then pressed further, asking if the sect leader was Ko Genin and his wife Sha Jian. Again, the man confirmed. Finally, Shuji asked if their son was Ko Eiku. To his shock, the man denied it. Shuji grabbed his collar in disbelief, demanding clarity. The man nervously explained that Shuji must have misunderstood Ko Genin, and his wife had no son at all. They had only one child, a daughter. Shuji staggered back in disbelief, his mind reeling as the truth sank in. The name he thought belonged to his sworn brother in his past life belonged instead to a young woman. Ko Aiko was a woman. Shuji could not comprehend what he had just learned. The thought echoed inside his head, almost mocking him. Aiku was a woman? It was absurd, yet the truth lingered before him like a blade. He scratched his head in frustration, considering his options. If he revealed the gold token, he could enter the Tiger Pit sect openly and confirm everything for himself, but such a step would interfere with his future plans. There had to be another way. Just then, the entrance door swung open, and a loud voice called out to him. A man rushed toward him, shouting with hostility. He accused Shuji of showing up casually after disappearing and called him an unreliable brat. According to him, Shuji had been tasked with cleaning the horse manure but had run away. The man seized Shuji's collar in anger, demanding to know where the others were before dragging him inside. As this unfolded, Shuji watched silently and thought to himself that although this man mistook Shuji for a homeless boy under his charge, the misunderstanding actually worked in his favor. Inside the stable, the man introduced himself with great pride. He was Wu Tuyen, the one responsible for managing the stables of the Tiger Pit sect. His instructions were simple. Shuji only had to handle the manure and feed under his supervision. Wu Tuyen reminded him that such work was better than living homeless, and he claimed to have already explained everything 2 days earlier. Shuji, unimpressed, simply responded that he did not know. Wu Tuyen became frustrated at the response. He looked Shuji over, questioning whether the boy was slow, since not only did he have poor memory, but he also dared to talk back to his elder. He reminded Shuji that he ate leftovers and slept in the stables, that none of them were needed by the sect, and that only out of pity had the sect leader taken him in as a homeless child. For that reason, he insisted Shuji should not run away simply because the work was hard, but rather do his job properly. Shuji, uninterested, averted his gaze. The moment he looked away, one of the horses suddenly grew agitated and kicked violently, striking Wu Tuyen and sending him crashing to the ground while clutching his knee in pain. Shuji frowned in confusion, wondering why the horse had suddenly gone wild. A mocking laugh then echoed across the stable. It came from a young master who stood nearby, proudly declaring that the horse was indeed a top-grade beast. He boasted that it had cost him enough to buy a mansion, and that even then it was not easy to tame. A servant beside him explained that one of the stable boys had been injured. The young master, however, coldly dismissed the incident, remarking that stable boys were no better than dogs and should be tossed some feed on the way out. The other stable hands rushed to help Wu Tuyen, muttering bitterly that the visitor was none other than the perverted Zhao brat from the Zhao clan manor. Wu Tuyen groaned in agony, clutching his leg. Shuji, standing in the back with arms crossed, observed the scene carefully. Inwardly, he recalled Aiku's words from his past life. The man before him, Zhao Taihan, was the very mastermind behind the downfall of the Tiger Pit sect. The stench of horse dung hung heavy in the air. But what unsettled Shuji more was the presence of the Zhao clan. Zhao Taihan wore a sly grin, remarking that just being seen by stable hands dirtied his clothes. A stern voice then interrupted. The sect leader, Ko Genin, had arrived, explaining that he had rushed over upon hearing that a guest had come. His expression hardened when he saw Zhao Taihan and demanded to know the reason for his visit. At once, Zhao Taihan and his lackey changed their demeanor, bowing respectfully and greeting him with smiles. Zhao Taihan called Ko Genin father-in-law and claimed he had come only to visit his future bride. With a dark smile, he clarified that he was referring to Aiku. Ko Genin's expression grew sharp with anger. He denied ever approving such a marriage. Zhao Taihan admitted that this might be true for now, but insisted that once Aiku turned 16, he intended to hold the wedding. He even boasted that it was already the talk of the region, with children singing songs about it. Ko Genin accused him of spreading such rumors to ruin his daughter's future. But Zhao Taihan only laughed nervously and pretended it was a joke, claiming his clan was far inferior to the Ko clan and would never go to such lengths. Ko Genin's rage flared, his eyes widening as he prepared to strike the insolent brat. But before the situation could escalate, a calm voice rang out. A girl approached gracefully, and both Zhao Taihan and his lackey froze, their mouths falling open at her beauty. It was Ko Aiku herself. With a steady tone, she declared that there would be no engagement between their families. She told Zhao Taihan to stop concerning himself with her and to seek another woman instead. Zhao Taihan stammered in desperation, warning her about the dangers of rumors. But Aiku met him with a cold gaze, insisting that there was no point in further discussion. She had no intention of marrying him or anyone from Zhao clan manor. Without another glance, she turned and walked away with her father. Zhao Taihan watched them leave with bitterness. He scoffed, calling her arrogant despite her sect's near-bankrupt state. His lackey asked what they should do, but Zhao Taihan replied that they had only stopped by on the way to the brothel anyway. Still, he muttered, the rumors had not lied. His servant agreed that she was even more beautiful than they had claimed. Zhao Taihan's expression turned sinister as he spoke of his obsession. People said she was a woman whose beauty could topple nations, and he believed it. A woman with such beauty, he said, was doomed to tragedy if she had no power or wealth. She was far too beautiful to belong to the Tiger Pit sect. She should curse the misfortune of being born there. But it was too late for her, because a wicked man like him had already set his eyes upon her. His lackey could only sigh that she was a poor girl. Zhao Taihan laughed wickedly and ordered his horse, declaring that they should head to the brothel. He climbed onto his horse, only to frown when the beast refused to move. His lackey asked what was wrong, wondering if the horse was sick. Suddenly, foam gathered at the horse's mouth, and it collapsed, throwing Zhao Taihan violently to the ground. At a distance, Shuji stood hidden, holding the animal's liver in his hand. He thought coldly of the fox claw technique, the art of the vixen. It was perfect. He had taken the liver without leaving a single mark, and no one would ever know why the horse had died. All of it, he thought, was because of that man. Zhao Taihan had been the true cause of everything. Shuji remembered how Aiku had once explained that the downfall of the Tiger Pit sect had been due to a power struggle with Zhao clan manor, but now he realized it was Zhao Taihan pulling the strings all along. Aiku must have known this, which was why she saw her beauty as a curse. That was why she had burned her own face with fire. Clenching the liver in his fist, Shuji crushed it and finally understood why she had done it. There was no need to hesitate in avenging his sworn brother any longer. He leapt over the wall with swift precision. From this moment forward, he would take action. That night, in Naimatsu prefecture of Anhui province, Shuji walked along the dimly lit street until he arrived at a farm tools shop. He paused at the entrance and whispered to himself that it had been a long time since he last came there. Then he stepped inside. An old man without a right arm or right leg sat on the floor, drinking heavily. He looked at Shuji with suspicion and asked who he was. Shuji introduced himself simply. The man dismissed him, saying he knew no one by that name, that he was retired, and that Shuji should go elsewhere. Ignoring him, Shuji sat down on a wooden block and requested that the old man make him a hammer. The man scoffed, doubting his seriousness. But Shuji gave precise instructions. It should be 17 sun long, 4 sun in circumference, weighing less than 10 jin, with a spherical head. The old man froze, shocked, and then grew serious. He warned that such a hammer could not even drive a nail. Shuji met his gaze and replied gravely that he was not using it to drive nails. The old man asked if there was anything else. Shuji ordered 2 weapons of 18.5 sun in length, bound with crocodile leather, and insisted on a properly forged heavy weapon. When asked whether he wanted a sword, axe, or spear, Shuji answered that he wanted a spear. The old man grabbed a stick and swung it toward the wall. He explained that it was the best weapon he had and that sharpening the blade would take a day. Shuji accepted this. He also asked for small, sharp weapons. The old man slammed the stick into the wooden block on which Shuji was seated, revealing hidden compartments filled with iron thorn spikes. Shuji examined them, pleased, and said he would take them all. When asked where they should be delivered, Shuji replied that he would come to pick them up. The old man noted that such an order would cost dearly. Shuji told him to name his price. The old man fell silent for a moment before speaking again. He said that his daughter had died 3 days earlier. Then he leaned forward creepily, gripping Shuji's shoulder and asking if there was any way to bring her back. Shuji did not flinch, did not respond. He only stared back in silence. The old man eventually pulled away with a sigh. He admitted that Shuji reeked so much of blood that he had mistaken him for a ghost. But since he was not, there was only one thing he could ask: to kill the men who had killed his daughter. Shuji rose to his feet and asked who they were. The old man told him it was the Black Tao sect. Shuji acknowledged it simply. As he turned to leave, the old man shouted after him that there were 4 of them, all from the Black Tao sect. At that moment, an aura of killing intent radiated from Shuji's body as he coldly replied that there was no need to even hear the enemy's names. Either way, he would kill them all. Before leaving the shop, Shuji paused and added one more request. He asked if the old blacksmith also had work clothes and poison. The old man scoffed, mocking the idea. He demanded to know if Shuji thought a blacksmith would sell such things. Yet, instead of dismissing him completely, the blacksmith pulled something from his pocket and threw it across the floor toward Shuji. The old man explained with a crooked smile that the bear hide had once belonged to a beast that killed 74 people. Alongside it, he tossed down a small jar. That jar, he said, contained a deadly poison, supposedly from the Miao tribe. He admitted, however, that he had never checked whether it was authentic. Shuji crouched, picked up the jar, and opened it. After a brief inspection, he calmly declared that the blacksmith had been conned. The old man scoffed again and said that he had figured as much. Still, Shuji kept the jar, remarking that although it was not genuine Miao poison, it might still be useful. He told the old man he would return the following day to collect the weapons he had ordered. As he approached the door, something by the wall caught his eye. A pile of bones lay stacked haphazardly. He stopped and asked the blacksmith what they were. The old man explained that he used to employ them when putting down livestock. He asked if there was something wrong with them. Shuji stepped closer, picked up one of the bones, and weighed it in his hand. He muttered to himself that it was not bad and declared that he would borrow it until his order was ready. Without waiting for permission, he carried it out with him. The blacksmith watched him leave, muttering that the boy was a strange one. For a moment, he wondered if Shuji might truly be a ghost. But then he shook his head and cursed under his breath. Ghost or not, it no longer mattered. As long as his daughter's killers were punished, he did not care what kind of being Shuji was. His own life, he thought bitterly, was a cheap price to pay for revenge. That night, Shuji appeared at the main gate of the Black Tao sect. 3 guards stood in front of the gate under the dim moonlight. One of them noticed a shadow approaching in the dark and shouted to the figure. He demanded to know who it was, warning that no entry was permitted past this point during an important meeting. The guard wrinkled his nose, complaining about the foul smell coming from whatever Shuji was carrying. He waved him off and told him to go somewhere else. When there was no response, the guard repeated himself angrily, assuming the boy could not hear. In the next instant, Shuji swung the bone upward and smashed the guard's chin, killing him instantly. The other 2 guards froze in disbelief. One of them muttered that the weapon in Shuji's hand was nothing but a horse's bone. Before they could react further, Shuji struck both of them down in the same ruthless fashion. He studied the bone for a moment and thought to himself that it might prove useful enough after all. His gaze turned toward the sect compound with cold determination. He remembered vividly. In the fight before his regression, more than half of the Black Tao sect had escaped. Their counterattack afterward had cost his side dearly. But because of that bitter experience, he knew exactly how their leader fled when things went wrong. This time, he swore, not a single one of them would escape. He would kill every last one. With that vow burning in his mind, Shuji walked straight into the sect grounds. He moved casually, yet with each step, more corpses fell in his path. He killed everyone who crossed him with effortless brutality, cutting through the sect like a shadow of death. Eventually, he entered the main hall. Inside, one of the men yawned and looked up with irritation at the commotion. He demanded to know what all the noise was about, then smirked when he saw Shuji. He dismissed him as nothing more than a brat who had interrupted his nap. Another man, calmer, explained that the sect leader was in a meeting with a guest. He warned Shuji that he would be dealt with swiftly. Shuji examined the men with a cold stare. Inwardly, he judged their strength. All four of them were somewhere between third and second rate. He concluded immediately that these must be the four elites of the Black Tao sect. He voiced his thought aloud. They were indeed the four elites, were they not? One of the men scoffed at his arrogance and lunged. Shuji responded without hesitation, driving his foot viciously into the man's crotch. The victim doubled over with a groan of agony. Shuji then rushed at another and jabbed his fingers into the man's eyes, blinding him. The other two drew their swords, preparing to attack. Shuji hurled the horsebone across the hall. It slammed into the face of one of them before ricocheting back. Shuji caught it mid-air, then sprang at the blinded man and smashed the back of his head in with a single swing. He turned to the man he had crippled earlier. The wounded elite screamed in fury, swearing that he would make Shuji suffer the same pain. Shuji scoffed. He mocked the man for always taking from others but finding it unbearable when something was taken from him. He sneered that it was funny how those who robbed others cried the loudest when robbed themselves. He then kicked over a nearby vase and sent it crashing into the man. With cold amusement, Shuji said he was getting worked up over nothing. He was not there merely to steal possessions. He was there to steal their souls. With a final swing, he smashed the man's skull, killing him instantly. Another of the elites, wide-eyed, muttered in disbelief. He said that even within the Black Tao sect, no one fought with such viciousness. And to charge into their headquarters wielding nothing but a horsebone, this intruder was not human. He was a monster. Shuji approached without a word. After a brief pause, he swung the bone with devastating force, sending the man flying across the hall and crashing through the wall. The survivor, trembling, tried to crawl back. He stammered in terror, demanding to know who Shuji was and who had sent him. Shuji's answer came cold and merciless. He told him it was the blacksmith. Then he swung once more and ended his life. Standing over the corpses, Shuji surveyed the wreckage. He muttered to himself that the four elites of the Black Tao sect had been taken care of. That, he thought, should be enough to cover the payment. He turned and left, already thinking of the shopkeeper. That night, the sky burned crimson, casting an ominous glow across the land. Inside the main chamber of the Black Tao sect, two men sat across from each other in a heated discussion. One of them broke the silence first, speaking with contempt. He remarked that the mission had failed and that both the master and the young master were furious. He scolded his counterpart, saying that if they had only succeeded in disguising the Black Tao sect as mere forest bandits and carried out the attack on the Tiger Enforcement Bureau agency, they could have secured both the stolen cargo and the Zhao clan's reward money. But instead, he spat. Their incompetence had ruined everything. Gu Yuhao, the sect leader of the Black Tao, trembled with rage as he listened. He clenched his fists and admitted that the ambush had failed and that they had lost too many men. He worried aloud that without the stolen goods, they would not even be able to pay their tribute to the evil alliance. His voice grew heavier as he muttered about the terrifying possibility of the money-collecting demon appearing. Unable to contain himself, Gu Yuhao slammed his fist on the table, his thoughts racing. He had sent more than enough men to crush the Tiger Enforcement Bureau. Never in his worst calculations did he expect his forces to be wiped out completely. No survivors had returned, leaving them blind to what had truly happened. The other man rose to his feet and sneered, suggesting that they should have sent one of the four Black Tao elites from the beginning. Gu Yuhao barked back in frustration, saying that if only they had been warned earlier of how strong the Tiger Pit sect's guards were, none of this disaster would have occurred. The man gave him a venomous smile and slammed the table in return. He accused Gu Yuhao of blaming them unfairly and warned in a cold voice that if another failure occurred, none of them would leave alive. Gu Yuhao held his head and sighed heavily. He muttered that he understood, though the words tasted bitter in his mouth. The other man continued with icy calm. Unless the Tiger Enforcement Bureau failed in their transport job, he explained, the Tiger Pit sect would never be cornered. And if that did not happen, the young master's marriage plans would never move forward. He added with a sneer that the young master would never rest until he claimed the girl he desired. Gu Yuhao erupted, shouting that he already understood and that the man should stop repeating himself. His anger echoed through the chamber until suddenly, a loud sound shook the air. Both men froze and looked toward the source. Gu Yuhao's heart pounded in his chest. He thought to himself that the sound had come from the entrance. The four elites should have been guarding it. His expression turned grim. Moments later, the door creaked open. To their horror, four severed heads rolled into the room. They were the heads of the Black Dao's four elites. Both men were struck dumb with shock. The Zhao clan representative stammered nervously, unable to comprehend what he saw. He muttered in disbelief that the four elites had been slain and trembled at the thought that perhaps the orthodox sect had sent a master to annihilate them. As their fear mounted, Shuji stepped forward slowly from the shadows. The Zhao clan man immediately tried to save himself. He stammered that he was from the Zhao clan and had nothing to do with the Black Dao. He insisted he had only come to negotiate and begged Shuji to believe him. Shuji's expression hardened, his lips pressed tightly together as he clenched his teeth. The man, seeing his hesitation, tried again, offering to lend Shuji a hand in his slaughter. Instead, Shuji spat a mouthful of blood straight into the man's left eye. The Zhao man screamed in agony, clutching his face. He demanded to know what Shuji was doing and cried out that he had said he was not part of the Black Dao. At that moment, Shuji remembered the words of his late master, Ko Kufu. Those skilled in the supreme demonic arts are called demon breakers. The blood of a demon breaker is a deadly poison to martial artists. Shuji thought to himself that although his blood was not as potent as that of a true demon breaker, it would still burn as though the man had been struck with searing chili powder. The Zhao man, enraged and half-blind, drew his sword and shouted in fury, demanding to know what was wrong with Shuji. He lunged forward with a fierce strike. Shuji dodged effortlessly. He noted in silence that the man's martial prowess was indeed first-rate, but still inferior to the four elites he had already slain. Then, a dark crimson aura began to radiate from Shuji and from the horsebone he held in his hand. Both men froze in horror. The Zhao man stammered in disbelief, shouting that it could not be that Shuji was using demonic arts. In desperation, the Zhao man lunged again, his eyes wild. He roared that Shuji was no orthodox master, but a mad demon. Shuji slipped past his strike with ease and swung the bone against the man's foot, shattering his balance. The Zhao man collapsed to the ground helplessly, and in the next instant, Shuji brought the bone crashing down, killing him instantly. Gu Yuhao, drenched in sweat, trembled where he stood. His thoughts raced. He knew what he was witnessing. Shuji was not simply an ordinary warrior. He was something far more terrifying. Gu Yuhao muttered inwardly that such men transcended the divide between orthodox and unorthodox. They were evil incarnate monsters the entire martial world had sworn to destroy. Demon users were savage beasts, he thought, slaughtering everything in their path until they reached a certain level of mastery. Seizing the opportunity while Shuji was distracted with the Zhao man, Gu Yuhao began to edge backward. He reached for a hidden switch on a bookshelf. He thought frantically that if he could slip out, he might have a chance to contact the Evil Alliance. If that failed, perhaps even the Martial Alliance could be warned. The hidden mechanism clicked, and the bookshelf slid open, revealing a narrow passageway. But before he could move further, Shuji's cold voice echoed behind him. Shuji called out his name, asking if it was truly him. Gu Yuhao froze and turned back, his heart skipping a beat. He thought in disbelief that Shuji still retained his sanity. Even after mastering the demonic arts, he was not a mindless beast. His control over his demonic energy was terrifying. Could this man truly be a peak stage master? Realization dawned, and terror followed. Gu Yuhao dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead to the floor in submission. He begged Shuji to forgive him. If Shuji would spare his life, he promised to do anything asked of him. He explained frantically that today was the deadline for paying tribute to the Evil Alliance. If he failed, he would surely lose his head, and even Shuji might be inconvenienced. Shuji looked down at him coldly. He thought to himself that Gu Yuhao was more perceptive than he had expected. After a brief pause, he suggested an alternative. He ordered Gu Yuhao to give up his martial arts. Gu Yuhao's body trembled violently. He stammered in shock, unable to believe what he had just heard. Shuji's gaze hardened. He warned that if Gu Yuhao refused, he would simply kill him. Gu Yuhao's mind raced. He thought bitterly that surrendering his martial arts would be no different from death. If he was to die regardless, then he would strike back one last time. With a snarl, he drew his sword. But Shuji had already anticipated this. His voice cut through the air, mocking him as nothing more than a coward who only boasted. The horsebone swung toward him. Gu Yuhao barely managed to dodge, but he staggered under the pressure of the crimson aura. Through gritted teeth, he muttered in disbelief that Shuji's energy was not that of a true peak stage master. He realized then that Shuji was only a second-rate warrior, and his expression twisted into a wild grin. He accused Shuji of daring to trick him, mocking him for his audacity. Shuji scoffed, unimpressed. He called Gu Yuhao a clown and declared coldly that his task would now be easier. His voice rang with finality as he stated it was time to purge the Black Tao. Gu Yuhao staggered and fell to the ground, clutching his head as a strange sensation spread from the wound Shuji had inflicted. In disbelief, he thought to himself that it was impossible. Had Shuji done something tricky with that last strike? Shuji approached slowly, his eyes cold as he looked down at the fallen sect leader. He told Gu Yuhao that he should be thankful, because it was Gu Yuhao's own misunderstanding that had made everything much easier. At that moment, the sinister spirit began to approach, laughing harshly as it called out that Gu Yuhao should die together with it. Driven into madness, Gu Yuhao lost control and swung his sword desperately. Shuji blocked the attack and retaliated with a precise strike at Gu Yuhao's left arm. Gu Yuhao cursed loudly and immediately attempted to stab forward, but Shuji dodged the attack with ease. In shock, Gu Yuhao demanded to know what kind of movement this was. In his thoughts, he compared Shuji's style to that of an assassin, wild yet disciplined, unpredictable yet deliberate, as though each motion was designed solely to kill regardless of the situation. To him, Shuji moved like a demon on the battlefield. Before he could recover, Shuji landed a brutal blow to his face, sending him collapsing to the ground, gasping for breath. As Gu Yuhao lay there, Shuji caught a piece of paper that drifted down from the air. He looked at it with disdain and muttered about the crimes detailed within. He read aloud that Gu Yuhao had kidnapped common women, sold them into brothels, and then extorted money from them to build the Black Tao sect into its current size. Furthermore, Gu Yuhao had borrowed heavily from the Tiger Enforcement Bureau. Hearing his crimes recited, Gu Yuhao broke down in tears and begged for his life. He cried out to Shuji, calling him a mighty warrior, and swore that he had been wrong. He promised that if spared, he would never again repeat such sins. Shuji ignored his desperate plea. He reached for a torch and looked down at him with merciless eyes. He asked how many people had once begged for their lives in front of Gu Yuhao, just as he was doing now. That, Shuji said, was the question. Shuji brought the torch close to Gu Yuhao's face, and as the flames burned closer, the sect leader sobbed uncontrollably, begging again for forgiveness, insisting he would do anything. Shuji showed no sympathy. He lit Gu Yuhao on fire, the flames consuming him as he screamed in agony. Raising the bone he carried, Shuji remarked that this act would at least ease some of the regret felt by the Tiger Enforcement Bureau. On the verge of death, Gu Yuhao's eyes widened in terror. In his last moments, he thought of the Tiger Enforcement Bureau, and a horrifying realization struck him. Could this man be the root of all the recent troubles? Before he could finish the thought, Shuji's weapon came down and killed him instantly. Shuji stood sternly over the corpse of the Black Tao's sect leader. He muttered under his breath that so this was Gu Yuhao. With a heavy breath, he walked away, acknowledging that despite everything, the man might have been worth something. As he stepped out of the chamber, he heard voices outside. A group was rushing toward the room, calling for their master to hurry. When they spotted Shuji, they demanded to know who he was. Without hesitation, they declared that it did not matter, and shouted to kill him. Shuji scoffed at their arrogance and said that it looked like it was going to be a long night. By the next day, rumors were already spreading through the busy streets. At the stables, the boys gossiped excitedly. One exclaimed that he had heard from a former servant of the Black Tao that the entire sect had been wiped out overnight and their estate burned to ashes. Another boy was shocked, but quickly added that they had deserved such a fate. Wu Tuyen, one of the stable boys, explained further. He said that even their Tiger Pit sect had suffered much because of the Black Tao. The others reacted in surprise, asking if Tiger Pit had been a victim too. Wu Tuyen went on to say that Black Tao had bought Tiger Pit's debts from the Qianzhuang, and on top of that, their members often showed up to stir trouble. But now, because of the destruction of Black Tao, those debts had become worthless, and Tiger Pit actually came out ahead. One of the boys declared in awe that the warrior who had defeated the Black Tao was truly a hero of Anhui province. At that moment, Wu Tuyen noticed Shuji loitering nearby instead of working. He shouted at him angrily, asking if he was finished cleaning the horse dung yet. Shuji looked back at him coldly, which only irritated Wu Tuyen further. He marched over, demanding to know what that look meant and whether Shuji had a problem. Inside, Shuji sighed in annoyance. He considered flashing the gold token to silence the boy, but quickly decided against it. It would be better to stay low until matters with the Zhao clan were resolved. Wu Tuyen snapped, shouting that he had had enough of Shuji's attitude, and warned that the boy had better start listening when he was spoken to. Before the confrontation could escalate further, a clear voice called out, telling them both to stop. Wu Tuyen stiffened as soon as he heard it. Terrified, he muttered to himself that he knew that voice. A young woman walked in, scolding Wu Tuyen not to pick on the newcomer. Shuji froze in shock the moment his eyes fell on her. The girl introduced herself kindly, saying she was not too familiar with their traditions, but that new recruits deserved some consideration. She urged Wu Tuyen to be patient. Wu Tuyen stammered nervously, trying to excuse himself by claiming it was not like that. He insisted the boy simply would not listen. But the young woman, Ko Aiku, reminded him sternly that even a brief encounter was fate, and that every connection should be treasured because life was unpredictable. She told him that perhaps they would meet again in a faraway place, or even become family someday. Wu Tuyen scoffed silently at the idea, thinking he would never see Shuji again, while another boy muttered inwardly that no one ever left Anhui province anyway. Aiku then turned her gaze to Shuji. With a warm smile, she asked if he was the new recruit, and told him that if anyone bullied him, he should come and tell her. Shuji's eyes widened as he stared at her, his mouth slightly open. In his heart, he thought that though her face and voice were not the same as in his memories, her clear eyes had not changed one bit. They were exactly as he remembered. She had not changed at all. Overcome with emotion, Shuji smiled warmly and told her that if anyone bullied her again, she should come and tell him. Aiku blinked in shock, unable to process what he had just said. She stammered, confused, asking what he meant. Wu Tuyen exploded from behind, calling Shuji an idiot for daring to speak to the young lady like that. But Aiku only smiled even more brightly, her expression soft and warm. She nodded and said gently that she understood, and that she would. Later that night, Shuji retrieved the weapons he had hidden beneath the hay. Looking down at them, he whispered to himself that he had avenged both the escort warriors and the shopkeeper. From here on, he declared, it was time to go after the killer of his sworn brother. In Anhui province, Shuji moved swiftly through the night, his figure gliding like a shadow toward the Zhao clan manor. With practiced agility, he leapt over the walls, his body cutting through the air like the wind, and slipped into the grounds unnoticed. One of the guards patrolling the area paused suddenly, tilting his head as if he had heard something. Before the man could raise an alarm, Shuji appeared behind him. With a single precise strike, he ended the guard's life in an instant, then dragged the limp body to a darkened corner and concealed it from sight. Not far away, two young attendants walked together, their hushed voices carrying through the quiet night. One of them remarked nervously that the security seemed unusually strict tonight. The other replied that it was only natural after the Black Dao sect had been wiped out overnight. Still, she added, the matter had nothing to do with them. Her companion agreed softly, though there was unease in her tone. Shuji, crouched in the shadows, listened as he surveyed the grounds. He flicked a single iron thorn across the ground in front of another guard. The man stepped forward and immediately hissed in pain as the sharp caltrop pierced his boot. Shock spread across his face as he muttered in disbelief that these were iron caltrops. Before he could react further, Shuji descended upon him. With one fluid motion, the assassin struck him down, then retreated silently to the rooftop above. The man's body slumped into a seated position, lifeless. Another guard nearby noticed the unusual sight. He barked at his companion, asking why he was just sitting around when they had not even had a proper meal. As he spoke, Shuji moved unseen, pouring a dark liquid from a small jar over the food that had been left out for the men. The irritated guard sat down and began eating, grumbling under his breath. When he approached the guard who seemed to be ignoring him, he cursed again, demanding that the man answer. But before the words could fully leave his mouth, blood began to trickle from his eyes, his nose, and his lips. Panic filled his expression as he staggered, whispering in horror about what was happening to him, before he collapsed on the ground in convulsions. The other guards were immediately thrown into alarm. One shouted in disbelief that poison had been used and ordered the kitchen staff to be rounded up. Another commanded that the gates be shut at once, so that no one could escape. From his vantage on the roof, Shuji watched with cold eyes. He closed the jar of poison and thought to himself with grim satisfaction that the shopkeeper's skills were as sharp as ever. The taste of the poison was not bad at all, he mused silently, and he admitted to himself that he liked it. Now that his equipment had been tested, he concluded, it was time for a more personal visit. The Zhao clan, that cursed name, would end tonight. Inside the manor itself, several guards muttered among themselves. One complained about the excessive security measures and wondered if they were truly necessary. Another agreed, pointing out that it was all because of the Black Dao incident. Their idle talk was cut short by the sharp sound. A window in front of them exploded into fragments, and Shuji leapt through the opening like a streak of death. Before any of the men could draw their blades, his spear flashed in the lamplight, and in a single sweeping motion he cut all three down. Their bodies crumpled lifelessly to the floor as he continued forward without pause. He ascended the staircase with calm, deliberate steps. As he did, another guard coming down the stairs caught sight of him. Mistaking Shuji for a fellow sentry, he remarked that he was supposed to be assigned to the fourth floor and asked about the loud noise he had just heard. He warned that the master had already gone to bed and instructed Shuji to tell the others to quiet down. Then, noticing the long spear in Shuji's hand instead of the standard sword, the man frowned in confusion. Before the realization could form fully in his mind, Shuji lunged forward and thrust the spear straight through his body. The man gasped, once before his life left him. The nearby guards cried out in shock as they realized an assassin had infiltrated the manor. They shouted for reinforcements, demanding to know why the others were not backing them up. In their panic, they rushed forward, but Shuji remained unshaken. He tossed a handful of iron thorns across the ground, and the men cried out as their feet were pierced, stumbling and slowed by sudden pain. Shuji closed in mercilessly, striking with his spear and hammer until every one of them lay dead. The manor grew tense with silence until a calm, commanding voice rang out from one of the rooms, complaining about the noise. Shuji froze for a brief moment, his eyes narrowing. His instincts screamed at him as he sensed a terrifying presence. In his mind, he admitted that the owner of that voice possessed an internal power that dwarfed even Gu Yuhao. The door opened, and from it emerged an old man who carried himself with the weight of authority and lethal confidence. He moved forward unhurriedly, his expression hard. The old man told Shuji that even if he had come uninvited, basic manners should still apply. Shuji's eyes, sharp and cold, fixed upon the figure before him. Inwardly, he acknowledged that at last he stood face to face with the man who had slaughtered countless innocents for his own gain, the man who had cast Eiko into hell. The old man studied him, his aura heavy and suffocating, and then asked what business brought him here at such an hour. Shuji fixed his cold gaze upon the figure before him and declared that the man standing there was none other than Zhao Yushi, the lord of the Zhao clan. Zhao Yushi's expression hardened, his voice filled with disdain as he called Shuji an insolent brat and warned him to watch his tongue. He demanded to know where Shuji had come from, noting that he did not appear to belong to any orthodox sect. Zhao Yushi speculated aloud, wondering if the intruder had ties to the Valley of Perdition, to the Path of Supremacy Society, or perhaps even to the lands beyond the Black Sands. Shuji studied Zhao Yushi's presence in silence. Inwardly, he noted how unusual the man's chi flow felt, twisted and warped, yet disturbingly focused. He thought to himself that this battle would not be an easy one. Finally, Shuji responded in a steady voice, revealing his allegiance. He claimed the name of the Tiger Pit sect. Zhao Yushi narrowed his eyes in disbelief. He remarked that it was hard to imagine anyone raised by the master of the Tiger Pit sect turning out like Shuji. He asked what connection Shuji truly had with that sect. Shuji sneered coldly and said that he was nothing more than a guest, a servant warrior, or perhaps something even lower, a stable hand. Zhao Yushi let out a sharp laugh. He told Shuji that he was not about to give anything away so easily. In the end, Zhao said, it mattered little where Shuji belonged, for he had already thrown himself into the lion's den. With that, Zhao drew his sword. A menacing aura flared around him, heavy and oppressive. He remarked that the proper way of handling this was to kill without hesitation, and he asked if Shuji agreed. As Zhao prepared to strike, Shuji closed his eyes for a brief moment. He thought to himself that meeting Zhao Yushi in the flesh was surreal. In his past life, he remembered, this man had lived out his years peacefully, while Aiku had been forced to swallow her tears, never able to avenge herself with her own hands. But now, Shuji told himself, things were different. In this life, he would claim her vengeance. He vowed in silence to Aiku that he would take revenge for her here and now. The two warriors moved at the same time. Zhao's sword met Shuji's spear in a clash that shook the air. Zhao was forced back a step, clearly stunned by the exchange. His eyes widened, and he exclaimed in disbelief. He demanded to know whether Shuji was using sorcery, because he could feel the Zhao clan's internal art flowing from Shuji's body. Shuji responded with icy calm, asking why Zhao would think that. Internally, Shuji measured himself. His spirit title, he reflected, stood at the 9th level of the compression stage, making him equal in cultivation to Zhao Yushi. one of the top masters of the age. The deciding factor, he concluded, would not be strength, but the vast difference in experience between a man living his second life and Zhao Yushi. The two clashed again, exchanging blows with speed and precision. Zhao barked out that Shuji's moves were not bad, but that such techniques alone would never be enough to defeat him. A grin spread across Zhao's face, and in his thoughts he mocked the younger man, wondering what Shuji would do when confronted by a sudden burst of fire that could blind him. But Shuji suddenly charged forward with terrifying speed. Zhao was caught off guard and barely managed to dodge. Even so, Shuji's spear scraped against Zhao's neck, leaving a shallow wound. Zhao's expression darkened. He admitted with a grim smile that Shuji was scarier than he had first believed, confessing that his head had nearly been severed. Then Zhao retaliated, his blade grazing Shuji's side. He smirked, telling Shuji that he had come close to spilling his guts. Shuji gritted his teeth. Inwardly, he cursed Zhao's advantage, recognizing that the older man's attacks carried longer reach and the fluid movements of a seasoned veteran. Finding a decisive opening would not be easy. He hurled one of his weapons, but Zhao easily dodged it. Zhao laughed in amusement and commented that Shuji could even wield ranged weapons. Shuji hurled a hammer next, forcing Zhao to glance upward. Zhao's grin widened as he pressed forward with attacks. He said that Shuji's tenacity intrigued him even further, and now he truly wished to know what kind of eccentric master had raised him. Then, Zhao made an offer in the midst of battle. If Shuji surrendered now, he said, he would make him one of his retainers. Shuji scoffed, his thoughts cold and sharp. He knew Zhao's words were nothing but deception, meant to mask the preparation of another attack. At that moment, Zhao stomped against the floor, releasing a surge of force as he launched a powerful strike. Shuji attempted to dodge, but stumbled against the corpse of a fallen guard. He cursed under his breath. Zhao lunged forward with lethal intent, shouting that this would end now. His sword pierced Shuji's body. Zhao paused, surprised that Shuji did not scream. He muttered in astonishment that Shuji had guts. He even compared him to his own son, mocking his offspring as a weakling who would be bedridden by the slightest wound. That, Zhao confessed, was why he had sought a strong wife for the boy. He admitted in a strangely quiet tone that he did not know how many years he himself had left, and that all he had truly wanted was to see the face of his grandchild. But Shuji's reaction stunned him. Shuji calmly grasped the sword that was embedded in his body and held it in place. Zhao tried to pull the blade back, but it would not move. His expression shifted to shock. He exclaimed in disbelief, realizing that Shuji was stopping the blade with his own rib. He shook with the realization that Shuji had deliberately left a weak spot earlier to bait him into attacking. Shuji's eyes remained as cold as ice. He told Zhao that he would reveal exactly how many years the clan lord still had left. As he spoke, a red aura erupted around him, surging with oppressive force. Zhao felt fear claw at him, an emotion he could scarcely believe he was capable of feeling. His thoughts screamed at him to run, but he froze. Zhao Yushi's heart raced as he tried to convince himself to retreat and gain distance. Yet the pressure of Shuji's aura engulfed him. Shuji's lips curled into a nasty smile, and he muttered his enemy's name like a curse. Zhao Yushi felt his own composure crumble. He panicked, cursing under his breath, his mind consumed by the desperate thought of escape as Shuji's menacing aura bore down upon him. Zhao Yushi was devoured in the crushing weight of Shuji's aura. In that instant, Shuji managed to thrust his spear forward, landing a devastating strike to Zhao Yushi's chest. Blood spilled from Zhao's mouth as he staggered back, his body racked with pain. With trembling disbelief, Zhao Yushi gasped out the words, demanding to know what that aura had been. He muttered that it felt like an illusion, like pure killing intent, and wondered aloud how a mere brat could possibly possess such a terrifying presence. Shuji only smiled, his expression wide and cruel, as he pushed the spear deeper into Zhao's body. He told Zhao that despite all the battles he had experienced in his long life, they were nothing more than structured duels and sparring matches. With a final push, Shuji pierced Zhao Yushi completely through. His words like venom, he explained that he had once been dragged into a war where battles were fought between foot soldiers, where the only choice was brutal slaughter or death, and that compared to those years of survival, this fight was nothing more than child's play. Zhao Yushi collapsed to the ground, his body failing him. Shuji released the spear and reached for his hammer lying nearby. Zhao, his voice now faint and broken as he neared his last breath, whispered his final plea. He begged Shuji to spare his son's life. His voice cracked with desperation as he repeated the words, "Not his son. Please, not his son." Shuji looked down coldly and raised his hammer. He said that such a request was impossible. Then, without hesitation, he brought the weapon down and smashed Zhao Yushi's head. With a grin, Shuji remarked that, in the end, it meant Zhao would never see the face of his grandchild. He wiped the blood from his face, his expression hard yet satisfied. Inside his thoughts, Shuji admitted to himself that he needed to recover. Around him, the spirits began to whisper, their voices slithering through the silence. They laughed and beckoned him onward, claiming they could smell it, guiding him toward a scent. Shuji looked around the room, his gaze falling on a pot. The spirits urged him further, insisting that what he sought was inside. Shuji smashed the pot, and from within emerged the trembling figure of young Master Zhao. The boy shrieked in terror, screaming for Shuji not to come any closer. He cried out desperately for help, his voice high and frantic. Shuji stared down at him coldly. Within his own mind, he reflected that because of trash like this, so many others had been forced to suffer through hell. He reached down and seized the young master by the hair, pulling him up as the boy shrieked again in terror. Shuji mocked him, remarking that he still had the energy to scream. He asked if, born into a wealthy family with money and power, the boy had thought the world itself was something to be owned. The young master's expression twisted in despair as tears streamed down his face. His body trembled uncontrollably. Shuji sneered, telling him that in that case, he would make him the star of the show. He leaned close, his eyes locking with the boy's as he whispered with sinister delight that tonight, the star was him. As the long night finally ended, posters appeared throughout Anhui province. They bore grim words. Because the Orthodox sect had joined hands with the Black Dao sect to gain unjust profit, someone had enacted punishment upon them in the name of their victims. The people began to chatter restlessly when they saw the notices. Some asked aloud what was going on, marveling that both the Black Dao sect and the Zhao clan manor had been wiped out one after another. Whispers spread of a mysterious vigilante who had killed everyone except the servants. Many agreed it was a good thing, for the monsters who had conspired against the Tiger Pit sect had finally been dealt with. Others wondered who the vigilante could be, pointing out that neither Gu Yuhao nor Zhao Yushi had been ordinary opponents. At the same time, chatter stirred among the stable boys. Wu Tuyen told them he had heard something from a woman who once worked at the Zhao clan manor. His companions leaned forward in anticipation. They teased him, asking why he always seemed to know stories like this, and laughed that a man with a face like his certainly seemed to attract many female fans. Wu Tuyen silenced them with irritation and told them to listen. He explained that the woman had said the vigilante called Zhao Yushi's name 3 times before killing him. The stable boys exchanged nervous looks. One asked why a name would be called like that. Another shivered and suggested that it was as though the vigilante dragged his victims to the underworld by summoning their names 3 times. Someone muttered that if that were true, the man was terrifying. Another asked whether such a monster would ever join the Tiger Pit sect. At that moment, the stable door burst open, and someone shouted that he was here. The stable boys flinched violently and shivered in fear. Elsewhere, Koaiku rode her horse at an easy pace, her thoughts drifting. Within her mind, she reflected on what people were calling the vigilante of 3 calls to the underworld. This mysterious figure had destroyed both the Black Dao sect and the Zhao clan manor. She admitted to herself that even if those groups had been wicked, it felt wrong to rejoice at the misfortune of others. Still, she could not help but wonder who the vigilante truly was. She even asked herself if it could be a ghost, for the thought was frightening but also filled her with curiosity. Most of all, she asked herself why the vigilante's actions always seemed to benefit the Tiger Pit sect. Her thoughts drifted to a memory of her sister's letter. In it, Eika had written that thanks to a certain vigilante, they had been able to protect the escorts and supplies from a bandit attack in the forest. She had given that man her gold medallion and told him to visit the Tiger Pit sect, asking Ko-Eiku to welcome him warmly if he ever arrived. Yet Ko-Eiku thought to herself that no guest bearing a gold medallion had come to them so far. She was deep in thought when the horseman pulled briefly at the reins, snapping her out of her reverie. She blinked and asked aloud where they were, before gasping in wonder at the sight before her. she exclaimed in awe at the view of the lake. Turning to the man guiding her horse, she asked brightly how he had known she liked lakes, and wondered aloud if she had ever told him such a thing. The horseman, who was Shuji, replied that she had. Koeku looked at him in confusion, muttering that she did not remember ever saying that. Within Shuji's heart, a silent thought stirred. He remembered that in their past life, whenever she was frustrated or her mind was in turmoil, she would always sit by the lake. Shuji then reached into his pocket, preparing something, and set it onto a small plate. Koiku leaned closer and asked what it was. Smoke began to spread softly into the surrounding air. She recognized it at once and exclaimed that it was insect-repellent incense. She admitted that she loved the lake, but the bugs always ruined it for her. She smiled warmly and told Shuji that he was very considerate for a newcomer, and asked if he had been this way at his last job too. Shuji paused for a moment before answering. He told her that a warrior died for one who recognized his worth. To those who treated him like family, he simply treated them as family in return. Ko-Aiko was left silent, confused, and shocked by the weight of his words. After a moment, she said gently that she would not pry into his circumstances, but as long as he was at Tiger Pit, they were his family. She reached out her hand toward him. In that instant, Shuji's mind returned to the memory of his last moment with her before he had regressed. He remembered her voice asking if he knew why she had saved him. She had explained that as the heiress of the Tiger Pit sect, she had trusted his words that the master and his wife were good people, and from that moment on, she had begun to think of him as family. Now, in the present, Shuji reached slowly for her hand, but before he could touch it, Wu Tuyen burst onto the scene, shouting that the escorts had returned. Ko-Aku's face lit up with joy. She turned her horse away, her eyes bright with excitement. Shuji was left with his hand hanging in the air, staring blankly at it. Ko-Aku turned back briefly and apologized, telling him that she was going ahead. She added that there would be a banquet that night, and reminded him to save room. With that, she urged her horse forward. Shuji scoffed softly to himself, but then allowed a small smile to form on his face. He murmured that this was not so bad either. Later that night, the grand banquet began inside the Tiger Pit sect. The hall was lively, filled with laughter, the clinking of cups, and the rich aroma of roasted meat and fragrant sake. At the head of the hall, Ko-Genin rose to his feet, lifting his cup high. With a commanding voice, he declared a toast to head escort Shuji, praising him as the hero of their long and perilous journey. The crowd erupted in cheers and responded with cries of, "Cheers! Drink to your heart's content today. Long live the Tiger Pit sect." While the atmosphere was joyous at the central tables, a different mood lingered among the stable boys who were seated further back. Shuji sat quietly, drinking without expression. It was then that Wu Tuyen, one of the stable boys, strode up behind him and laid a hand heavily on his shoulder. In a mocking tone, he demanded to know who Shuji thought he was, daring to accompany the young miss. The other stable boys jeered, saying only the old guards were permitted to escort her. Wu Tuyen pulled away the food that was set in front of Shuji and sneered, telling him that if he behaved arrogantly, he would not be allowed to eat. The others joined in, shouting that there was no food for someone like him and cursing him as an arrogant brat. Shuji, however, remained completely unfazed, his calm demeanor only irritating them further. At that moment, Ko-Aiko approached. Her sharp voice cut through the mockery as she asked the boys what they thought they were doing. All of them flinched under her gaze. She accused them of bullying Shuji once again, though Wu Tuyen hastily lied that they had simply brought him food to share. Another stable boy echoed the excuse, stammering nervously. Koeku sighed softly, unwilling to be fooled. She took a mochi ball from her own plate and, with a gesture of care, offered it to Shuji. She reminded him of her words before that he must let her know if he was being bullied. She looked at him with concern and asked if he had been eating properly, wondering aloud if they were depriving him of food. She urged him again that if such things happened, he must tell her. Just then, her father called her name. Ko-Aku turned reluctantly and told Shuji she had to go, reminding him once more to eat well. She walked away, leaving the stable boys fuming with resentment. Wu Tuyen could not contain his anger, demanding to know how Shuji had managed to win the young miss's favor. Another boy shouted that Shuji was nothing but a kid compared to them, while a third insisted that his face was the only reason he was treated kindly. Wu Tuyen sneered, declaring that since the young miss had ordered it, they would feed him after all. But with twisted spite, he picked up food and hurled it at Shuji, shouting for him to eat. Shuji leaned casually aside, letting the food miss him entirely. The stable boys grew even angrier, demanding that he stop dodging. They began flinging more food at him in succession. Yet Shuji continued to move with effortless grace, evading every piece except for the bits of meat, which he caught in his mouth and ate without hesitation. The boys were enraged. They shouted that he was mocking them, that his expression was infuriating, and that they would beat the arrogance out of him. Meanwhile, at the head of the banquet, Koganen once again addressed the hall. He praised Shuji for ensuring the safe return of their caravan, saying that now at last, everyone could breathe in relief. His wife reassured the families of the escorts who had died, swearing on her honor that she would take full responsibility for them until the end. Shu Eika, seated in a place of respect, bowed and said solemnly that no one needed to worry about the families of the fallen escorts, for she had only done her duty. Ko Eiku appeared at her side with a teapot and gently poured her a drink, thanking her for her service. Shu Eika expressed her gratitude. Ko Eiku then mentioned the guest with the gold plaque referenced in a letter. Shu Eika admitted she had been hoping to ask about that person as well. She said she had not seen them and wondered if they had truly come to the Tiger Pit sect. Ko Eiku shook her head and explained that they had not. If they had, she assured, they would have been welcomed as an honored guest. Shu Eika sighed with regret. She explained that the guest was a spear-wielding vigilante who, despite his youth, had demonstrated overwhelming power and destroyed the Green Forest Bandits, who were in truth members of the Black Dao sect. She lamented that she could not thank him again. In her heart, she thought that if she could recruit such a master as a retainer, the strength of her sect would increase, and no more of her subordinates would have to die. Ko Eiku placed a hand gently over Shu Eika's and told her to wash away her worries and regrets with a drink. She reminded her that thanks to her hard work, countless people were smiling that very night. Shu Eika was moved, her thoughts shaken as she looked around the hall at the cheerful faces of those gathered. She realized that she and her subordinates had fought for the sake of this peaceful, everyday life. Her gaze, however, drifted toward the table of the stable boys. She froze when her eyes fell upon Shuji. Her cup slipped from her hands as her body trembled. In disbelief, she thought that the brat she had seen before was sitting right there. Shuji noticed her staring. As he continued dodging the food hurled at him, he casually raised a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay quiet. Shu Eika's heart pounded, her body drenched in sweat. She wanted to cry out, but Shuji's cold inner voice reached her. It was not time yet, he warned. It was too early to use her gold plaque, and until then, she was to remain silent about him. The stable boys, now exhausted from their efforts, were gasping for breath. Wu Tuyen cursed between heavy pants, insisting that Shuji stop moving. Gathering themselves for a final attempt, the group lunged forward together to attack him, but just as they charged, a strange sound echoed through the banquet hall. It came from right beside their table, where a mysterious man had struck a wooden bell with a piece of bone. His calm voice cut through the noise, telling them to be quiet while he was eating. Wu Tuyen scowled, protesting furiously. He shouted that the man should be grateful to the sect master for allowing a beggar like him to attend the feast. He insulted him, saying he stank and should eat quickly and leave. The mysterious man responded with amusement, calling him feisty. He reached out his hand and muttered that perhaps he would have to teach the boy a lesson. Wu Tuyen demanded to know what he was mumbling about. But before the stranger could grab him, Shuji swiftly pulled him back. The man's eyes widened with surprise. He acknowledged Shuji's quick reaction, remarking that with such sharp instincts, the boy had a bright future ahead. The man then rose to his feet, glaring at Wu Tuyen. He told him he should spend the rest of his life grateful to the boy who had just saved him. The stable boys watched in confusion as the stranger walked away. Wu Tuyen muttered that the man must be insane. The mysterious figure moved to the center of the banquet hall and raised his voice so that all could hear. He thanked the sect for inviting him to such a fine banquet, though he lamented that the sake was cold. With a smile, he declared that he would pour them all a cup of hot sake himself. He leapt forward onto the table where the sect leader sat. Placing his finger gently upon the wooden surface, he released a surge of internal energy. The sake on the table began to heat, then to boil, and finally evaporated entirely. The man chuckled, feigning regret that he had made it too hot and caused the fine sake to vanish. Shueika sat frozen, her mind reeling in shock. She realized at once that with just his internal energy, this man displayed a mastery that marked him as someone who had reached the very pinnacle of power. Koganon rose to his feet, demanding to know who this monk was. The man smirked and replied that he was no monk, though he had picked up the wooden fish on his way there. He then introduced himself boldly. He said he was known as the money-collecting demon, affiliated with the Unorthodox Alliance. Once, he had been called the Staff Demon. His name, he declared to all present, was Gu Goryu. The man known as the Staff Demon, Gu Goryu, had once been infamous as one of the twin demons who rampaged freely across the martial world. After clashing with the evil alliance, he fought their leader and was ultimately defeated. From that day on, he was forced to serve under the alliance. His main task became the collection of tribute payments from organizations that failed to pay on time, and if any of them dared to resist, the result was complete sect annihilation. When Koganon looked upon him, he muttered in suspicion whether this man could be the one Shueika had given the golden plaque to. Shueika immediately denied it. She explained firmly that this was not the man, and that she had never seen him before either. Gu Goryu sat at the head of the banquet table, his large frame looming over the gathering. With deliberate slowness, he poured wine into a cup and then addressed the hall. He remarked that it had been a long time since he had last come to Anhui province, and that during his absence he had heard rumors of both the Black Dao sect and the Zhao clan manor being crushed. As he spoke, an overwhelming pressure filled the banquet area, suffocating those around him. He sneered that, under such circumstances, if they were celebrating with a loud banquet, it was only natural that they would fall under suspicion. Shueika froze in shock at his oppressive aura, but Koganon quickly responded, insisting that it was a mere coincidence, and that their sect had nothing to do with those events. Gu Goryu gave a chilling smile and told them that if that were truly the case, then they could simply continue their banquet as if nothing had happened. Suddenly, his sharp eyes turned toward the back of the hall. He murmured that he had heard the rumors before, but was now seeing with his own eyes that the woman there was even more formidable than the stories claimed. His gaze fell directly upon Ko-Eiko. Startled, Ko-Eiko demanded to know what he was talking about. Gu Goryu laughed loudly and declared that he had heard the Zhao clan had been so dazzled by her beauty that it had led to their downfall. Now that he was seeing her himself, he said, he could understand why. He jeered that with such a face, it was no surprise that a sect or two might have fallen because of her beauty. With a booming laugh, he suddenly moved and appeared directly in front of her, leaning close to her face. He asked what she thought would happen when someone powerless was born with such beauty. Before she could answer, he spat directly on her face. Ko-Aiku froze in horror, her body trembling in both fear and humiliation, while Gu Goryu grinned wickedly. He proclaimed that such a woman was destined to suffer undeserved humiliation, just like she was experiencing now. Then, he burst into manic laughter, filling the hall with his crude voice. The sound of swords being drawn broke through his laughter. Both Koganon and Shueika raised their weapons and leveled them against Gu Goryu. Koganon shouted furiously, demanding to know the meaning of his behavior. He warned that if Gu Goryu had come here only to provoke a fight, then he should not expect them to sit idly by. Gu Goryu, unbothered, casually picked up a piece of meat and chewed it, mocking them as he asked if they truly believed they could defeat him. Koganon glared coldly and answered in a strong voice that this was not about whether he could win or lose. He explained that his daughter had been insulted right before his eyes, and that for that alone, he could not allow the matter to rest. He demanded that Gu Goryu follow him outside, so they would not involve the innocent people around them. Gu Goryu scoffed and declared that there was no need to go elsewhere. He insisted that they settle the matter immediately, right there and then. Just as the clash seemed inevitable, Ko-Aiku intervened. She begged her father to sheath his sword. After wiping the spit from her face with calm composure, she addressed Gu Goryu directly. She thanked him for teaching them an important lesson and politely poured him a cup of wine. Gu Goryu looked at her in confusion and remarked that even after being spat on, she was offering him a drink. He mocked her, calling her pathetic for the daughter of a warrior clan. Ko-Eiko replied steadily that she was not enduring humiliation in order to grovel. She explained that Gu Goryu had reached the pinnacle of mastery, a true senior of the martial world, and that she was simply showing respect as a junior warrior toward his efforts. For a moment, Gu Goryu's expression darkened. He gritted his teeth and laughed mockingly, saying that despite being such a great warrior, all he had done was spit on a girl. He asked whether she found that ironic. Ko Aiku calmly answered that perhaps her words had been lacking and sounded that way, but she had only spoken her true feelings. With sincerity, she bowed and offered him another cup, asking him to accept it. There was silence before Gugoryu suddenly burst into booming laughter. After laughing heartily, he accepted the cup and drank it in one gulp. To everyone's surprise, he then apologized for his rudeness earlier and asked the sect leader to sheath his sword. With a sly smile, he said that he was doing this to save Ko Genin's face and that they should wrap the matter up there. Ko Genin scoffed but obeyed, lowering his blade. As Gugoryu walked past him, he sneered that if he had been 50 years younger, he would have claimed Ko Aiku for himself. Just as he was about to leave, he stopped and turned back, saying he had nearly forgotten the most important matter. He explained that since the Black Dao sect had been destroyed, he had not received the tribute they owed him. Returning empty-handed would damage his reputation. Ko Genin narrowed his eyes and asked what exactly he was implying. Gugoryu leaned forward with a nasty grin and explained that he did not care who destroyed the Black Dao sect or the Zhao clan manor. All that mattered was that he brought back the required sum of money. He reminded them that just a moment ago he had done Ko Genin a favor by saving his face, so now it was Ko Genin's turn to save his. Maintaining composure, Ko Genin asked whether Gugoryu was truly trying to collect tribute from clans belonging to the orthodox sects. Gugoryu mocked him, saying that it was ugly to call it tribute. He preferred to call it a consolation fee. Ko Genin pressed further, asking whether Gugoryu had demanded such a fee from the Namgung clan as well. Gugoryu scoffed at the very suggestion, declaring that if he had tried that, he would already be dead at the hands of the Namgung patriarch. He then turned back to Ko Genin, reminding him that the Tiger Pit sect had profited handsomely from its last trip. He ordered them to think of it as condolence money for the poor souls of the fallen Black Dao sect, and asked whether that sounded more acceptable now. After a long pause, Ko Genin sighed and reluctantly began to agree, asking for some time. Before he could finish, Gugoryu slammed his staff against the ground with thunderous force. The impact shattered the floor, leaving a deep crater. His voice grew sharp as he warned that time was precious to everyone. Ko Genin clutched his head in frustration. His thoughts raced. He realized that if he angered the staff demon, the Tiger Pit sect would be annihilated tonight. Even if he turned to the Namgung clan for aid, there was no guarantee they would intervene. In the end, he understood that there was only one option left. After staring grimly at the crater Gugoryu had made, Ko Genin finally ordered that all the money be brought forth. A heavy sack filled with gold and silver ingots was placed before Gugoryu. With laughter rumbling in his throat, he stepped forward immediately to examine it. Ko Genin declared firmly that this money was being given on the condition that Gugoryu would not lay a single finger on anyone from the Tiger Pit sect. Gugoryu examined the ingots with satisfaction and scoffed that he was not a monster, and he knew the limits of decency. Still, he added mockingly that for someone voluntarily giving him money, Ko Genin carried quite a murderous aura. Dismissing it with a wave, he declared he would accept the fee gratefully. As he prepared to leave, he tossed a single gold ingot toward Ko Aiku, calling it his apology for spitting on her earlier. Ko Aiku lowered her head in silence, while Ko Genin clenched his hands in frustration but said nothing. Gugoryu finally turned toward the exit. With a laugh, he told them there was no need to see him out. The moon was bright enough that he could find his way perfectly well on his own. Later that night, at the stables, two stable boys were chatting quietly. One mentioned that he had heard the escorts whispering that Gugoryu was strong enough to kill every single person at the banquet by himself. The other replied that it was a good thing the situation had been solved with money, because once someone was dead, it was all over. Both agreed that the thought of such a man was truly terrifying. At that moment, Wu Toyen rushed into the stables, drenched in sweat and struggling to catch his breath. He carried a food bundle in his hands. The boys greeted him with surprise, asking what he was holding. They assumed that since the banquet had been ruined, there would be no food left. But they praised him for always thinking of them. Wu Tuyen ignored their questions and demanded to know where Shuji was. The stable boys admitted that they had not seen him in some time. Wu Tuyen fell silent for a moment, then whispered Shuji's name. His mind drifted back to the moment when Gugoryu had almost struck him down. and Shuji had stepped in to save him. Something stirred within his heart, and with sudden emotion, he shouted into the night, declaring his longing. His voice carried through the stables as he cried out, "Shuji, my beloved Shuji, where are you?" Elsewhere, under the moonlight, Goryu strolled happily after leaving the banquet. His steps carried him toward a wooden bridge, but as he approached, he noticed someone standing on the other side. He stopped and narrowed his eyes, recognizing the figure. It was Shuji, and a menacing aura radiated from him. Goryu scoffed at the sight, and remarked that for a moment he had thought it was some kind of monster, but it turned out to be a man after all. He identified him as the stable hand from earlier that evening, and asked why he had followed him. With mocking disdain, he suggested that perhaps Shuji was here because of the insult he had directed at his lover. If it was revenge for her sake, then it was misguided. He admitted that he had spat in her face, but she had not reacted, which meant that his insult had been wasted. In his view, there was no revenge to be had. At last, Shuji spoke, his voice carrying a chilling tone. He told Goryu that perhaps it was because he was half-heartedly imitating a monk that he spoke such nonsense. He declared that there had been enough chatter. Shuji stepped forward slowly and then, in an instant, leapt at Goryu with his spear, shouting for him to hand over the money. The spear cut through the air toward him, but Goryu burst into loud laughter. He easily dodged the flurry of strikes, his booming voice echoing across the bridge as he shouted that it had been 40 years since anyone had said such words to him. The last man who had dared to demand that of him was the rogue Night King, and now Shuji was the latest. He found the moment so amusing that he could not stop laughing. He swung his staff, meeting Shuji's weapon with a heavy clash. Shuji staggered back from the impact and looked at his trembling spear. Goryu grinned and remarked that it was a fine spear, then asked what its name was. Shuji replied coldly that it had none. Goryu mused that it was a shame, for it was a small heirloom but a fine weapon nonetheless. He spun his staff with a flourish, then abruptly stopped and pointed it out. He explained that it had once been a spear, but after the blade had broken he had used it as a club. Forged of black iron, it was still durable, though heavy, and that was its only flaw. If the blade had remained intact, people would have called him the spear demon instead of the club demon. He said it was truly regrettable. Before he could finish, Shuji shook the wooden bridge violently and declared that no matter how sturdy it was, in the end it was still only a spear without a blade. Lunging forward again, Shuji added that it was like a wolf of the rogue style whose fangs had been removed, just like Goryu himself. Goryu's balance wavered and he roared in rage, calling Shuji a filthy creature. He narrowly avoided the attack, though the spear grazed his face and his straw hat. Groaning in pain, he steadied himself and spun his staff furiously. He shouted that striking treacherously in a duel between men was the act of a coward. Suddenly, he shifted his spin into a stabbing thrust toward Shuji. Shuji noticed his intent and dodged sideways. Grabbing onto the rope of the bridge, he swung himself to the side, reached into his pocket, and hurled iron caltrops toward his opponent. Goryu shouted as he leapt back from them, mocking the move as cowardly but claiming it would not work on him. He deflected the remaining caltrops with his staff. Shuji darted to the side again and spat at him. Goryu noticed it instantly and tilted his head out of the way. With a smirk, he admitted that Shuji was more persistent than he had thought. Swinging his staff with force, he mocked him further, asking if he was so upset that he had spat on his lover and called him a naive fool. Shuji flipped backward, narrowly dodging the blow. Landing on his hand, he hurled more caltrops while spitting again and simultaneously swung his leg in a wide kick. Though the spit initially missed, he caught it with his foot mid-motion and kicked it directly into Goryu's face. A scream tore from Goryu's throat as his skin burned instantly where the spit had landed. Staggering, he muttered in disbelief that the spit itself was burning. His mind raced as he wondered if Shuji was a poison user from the Sichuan Tang family. He could barely see, his vision blurring. Shuji closed in with grim determination. He gripped a hammer in his right hand, discarded his spear, and smashed it down toward Goryu's head. Goryu swung his staff blindly, but Shuji pressed forward without hesitation. Goryu tried to read his movements, and managed to dodge backward just before another strike landed. Breathing heavily, he steadied himself from a distance and admitted aloud that he had underestimated Shuji. He had not thought a mere stable hand could be so strong. Yet even as he spoke, he muttered privately that it could not be right. There was no way a man like Shuji had trained under the Tiger Pit sect. His movements were too different, too unorthodox. They carried no regard for form or decorum. His entire body, Goryu realized, was a killing weapon. Tearing the cloak from around his neck, Goryu shouted that he did not care which demon or fiend Shuji was. He swore he would drag him to hell himself. He raised his staff into a battle stance. Shuji retrieved his discarded spear with a string tied to his hand. A dark aura swirled around him as he entered his own stance, coldly remarking that Goryu talked far too much. The two men glared at one another, the night filled with tension. A gust of wind swept across the bridge, rustling the leaves. They both braced themselves, waiting. The moment a leaf touched the ground, they lunged simultaneously, their weapons colliding with immense force. The impact created a shock wave that made the wooden bridge tremble violently. An arm dropped from the bridge and fell into the depths below. As it hit the ground, a scream echoed through the night. Shuji stood still, calm and steadied. In front of him, Goryu laughed maniacally. Blood gushed from his wounds, yet he grinned through the pain. He shouted that though his arm had cost him dearly, the price was worth it. He had won. Shuji, impaled through the chest by the staff, collapsed to his knees. A few minutes earlier, the clash between Goryu and Shuji's weapons sent sparks flying. Shuji's spear slid off to the side, but with sharp instinct he redirected it and swung toward Goryu's head. As the blade closed in, Goryu muttered with a grin that it was not bad. He shifted his body sideways and declared that Shuji could have his left arm, but in return he would take his heart. In the same moment, his staff pierced straight into Shuji's chest. Blood sprayed against his face, and Goryu bared his teeth in a wide smile as he growled that the boy's heart was his. After a pause, Goryu pulled his staff free, and blood gushed from Shuji's body. Looking down coldly at his fallen opponent, he admitted aloud that though he had won, it came at a steep price. He could hardly believe it. For a brat like Shuji to pose such a threat to him was unthinkable. He wondered if Shuji had been raised along the demonic path. Suddenly he coughed violently and vomited blood, realizing with dread that the internal damage he had sustained was far worse than he thought. He lifted his staff again, raising it toward Shuji's body, determined to finish him. His thoughts raced. This brat was too dangerous. He could not afford to leave him alive. He had to end it here and now. But before he could strike, his entire body froze in horror. Spirits began to emerge from behind Shuji, writhing in the darkness as Shuji's body slowly pushed itself upright. Goryu staggered back, his eyes wide as he shouted in disbelief. He demanded to know what was still driving Shuji to stand. Was it money, pride, fighting spirit, or love? What could possibly keep him moving after such wounds? Shuji struggled forward, his body trembling. He lifted his head with effort, opened his mouth slowly, and whispered a single word: fear. Goryu flinched at the sound, his expression twisting with unease. He demanded to know what Shuji meant. Shuji glared back at him with a menacing stare, and asked if he knew where people went when they died. He lowered his eyes toward the ground beneath the bridge, where a deep pit had opened. From within, spirits screamed in agony, clawing desperately to climb upward. Shuji's voice was cold as he explained that when one believed such a fate awaited after death, one could never allow oneself to die. Goryu smirked nervously and scoffed that Shuji must be seeing illusions. Yet inside, his thoughts betrayed his fear. Was Shuji truly standing from sheer terror of death? What had he seen that gave him such strength? Goryu admitted to himself that he was dying to know, but he also resolved that he had no intention of dying himself. He stepped back, raised his weapon again, and shouted that he would not die here on a bridge. He would die peacefully in his bed as a frail old man. With a roar, he swung his staff once more. Shuji blocked the strike with his spear. Clenching his teeth, he pushed forward and swung with fierce determination. Goryu met him head-on, and their weapons clashed again and again. In the heated exchange, Shuji managed to slice off two of Goryu's fingers, though Goryu retaliated with a blow that tore into Shuji's left side. Blood and sweat mixed on the wooden planks as they continued their brutal dance. Goryu clicked his tongue at the sight of his severed fingers and growled that Shuji had taken two from him. But with a wicked glare, he spat that Shuji was finished. Before Shuji could react, a shard of metal embedded itself into Goryu's eye. He screamed in agony, staggering backward. Through clenched teeth, he demanded to know what Shuji had just spat out. Shuji calmly chewed through the pieces of iron caltrops in his mouth and declared that Goryu would die here today. Terror began to seep into Goryu's movements. He swung his staff wildly, shouting for Shuji to stay back. Blow after blow landed on Shuji, But the younger man refused to fall. Horror filled Gu Goryu's mind as he thought frantically. Shuji should have been fatally wounded. Why was he still advancing? What kind of creature was he? With desperation, Gu Goryu screamed that Shuji was a demon and hurled his staff with all his might. The heavy weapon struck Shuji's head, obliterating half of it. Gu Goryu froze for a moment, then erupted into laughter. He threw his head back and cackled, convinced that he had won. In his mind, he shouted in triumph that this was his victory. He gathered chi into his palm, lunged forward with a wide grin, and yelled that he would end Shuji's misery in a single blow. But before he could strike, Shuji shifted to the side with unexpected speed. Gu Goryu's eyes widened in disbelief as he saw Shuji slice through the rope of the bridge. Fear swallowed him whole. He was certain he had crushed Shuji's head. How could he still move? When had he cut the rope? The bridge began to collapse. Shuji remained standing on the falling planks, while Gu Goryu sprinted desperately to the other side. He made it across, gasping, but his heart pounded erratically as a suffocating presence pressed down on him. Spirits appeared behind him, their whispers echoing in his mind. Panic overtook him. Could Shuji still be alive? It was impossible. With wounds that severe, there was no way. Perhaps it was just a futile struggle before death. Yet Gu Goryu could not dismiss the truth he felt in his gut. Shuji was not a man bound by common sense. He turned his head, and to his horror, saw Shuji in midair. The stable hand pulled his spear back with the string tied to his hand and hurled it forward. The weapon flew with deadly precision and pierced straight through Gu Goryu's skull. As blood poured down his face, Gu Goryu laughed one final time. His thoughts echoed back to his first impression. He had thought Shuji was human, then mistaken him for a monster. With his last breath, he whispered the truth. Shuji was neither man nor monster. He was a god of death. After Shuji drove his spear through Gu Goryu and watched the staff demon's body collapse against the cliff wall, he began to fall with it. As he dropped, he reached instinctively for the string attached to the spear and managed to catch it, leaving himself dangling in midair. He hung there with his body shaking, gritting his teeth as pain tore through him, and he thought that he was a wreck. He felt as though his head had been split open, his organs were ruptured, and his leg had been broken. Even so, he reminded himself that as long as he did not die, he could recover. At that moment, an ominous surge of energy pulsed around him, and the chi of malevolent spirits swirled like smoke around his wounds. He recognized the sensation immediately, and thought to himself that it was the blood-stained cursed demon art, a strain of the supreme demon arts. He closed his eyes and remembered how Kofu had once explained that the only reason he could pursue revenge endlessly, even when his body was ruined, was because of the supreme demon arts' extraordinary regenerative ability. Shuji considered that his own life had been saved for the same reason, and wondered for a moment if he should feel grateful. Lightning then crashed violently against the cliffside, striking Gu Goryu's body and causing the rocks and mud around it to break loose. The corpse tore free from the wall, and the earth rumbled as the resulting landslide began to fall. Shuji looked up at the collapsing debris and muttered, "Do not screw with me." The force knocked him loose and he fell to the bottom of the ravine. Mud and broken stone rained down upon him as heavy rain intensified the collapse. When everything settled, half of his body had been buried beneath the rubble. Nearby, the evil spirits began whispering in cruel voices, mocking his state and shouting for him to die. They taunted him, repeating that he should be buried alive, their voices rising until they suddenly stopped as a new presence approached from behind them. All of the spirits turned and saw Gu Goryu's spirit staggering towards Shuji. Shuji lay on his back, exhausted, and met the spirit's gaze as it growled. Recognizing it, Shuji addressed it by its title and name, calling it the staff demon Gu Goryu. The ghost did not stop. It continued snarling and attempted to strike him with an ethereal version of its staff. Shuji struggled, clawing at the mud and rubble until he freed himself enough to scramble upright. He repeated the name again, louder this time, declaring it with growing authority. When the spirit lunged a final time, Shuji raised his voice sharply and commanded, "Staff demon, Gu Goryu." The attack froze inches from him. The spirit shrieked in agony as its form began to unravel, pulled violently into Shuji's body in a swirl of pale flame and scattered chi. When the spirit fully disappeared inside him, Shuji scoffed and remarked that a cursed ghost which had reached the peak of its power would take considerable time to tame. He added that absorbing such a spirit would serve as the catalyst he needed to rise from the compression stage to the remain stage. With a groan, he pushed himself to his feet again, and said quietly that it was time to head back. Pain surged up his leg, and he collapsed again, clutching the injury while cursing under his breath. He murmured that after returning, he would need to focus on healing his body before attempting to open the Ren and Du meridians. He grabbed the string still attached to his shattered weapon, and clicked his tongue at the sight of the broken spear, complaining softly that he could not even use it as a cane. He turned his head and saw Gu Gordyu's lifeless body lying nearby, where the rain dripped heavily over mangled flesh. Beside it rested the staff that had earned the demon its name. Shuji murmured in surprise and limped over to pick it up. After lifting it and feeling its weight, he commented that if Gu Goryu had carried a complete spear instead of a staff, he would have been the one to die. He looked at the broken weapon still in his hand, and thought grimly that he would need to give his spear a sharp tip, otherwise he would become as defanged as the fallen demon. Sometime later, Shuji limped into town under a pounding midnight rain. Blood trailed behind him in a thin line as it dripped steadily from his injured leg, and he used the heavy staff as support. The wind screamed through the streets, and his soaked clothes clung to his skin. After a few steps, his balance faltered, and he slammed shoulder first into a wet stone wall. He clicked his tongue in frustration and thought that even with the strength he had absorbed from the supreme demons, his body refused to recover quickly. He reflected that this was the first time since returning to the past that he had poured everything into a fight, and admitted to himself that the aftermath was rough. Every raindrop felt like a needle piercing his skin. His staff felt like iron, and the bag slung over his shoulder felt unbearably heavy. He thought that he would close his eyes and rest for a moment. His vision blurred, and he stumbled forward. As he drifted in that haze, he recalled Ko-Eiko's gentle voice telling him that although Shuji might have his own reasons and secrets, as long as he stayed at the Tiger Pit sect they were his family. The memory flashed through his mind like a spark, and his eyes widened slightly in realization. He muttered softly, family, a home where I can rest easy. He smirked at the thought, pushed himself upright again, and continued trudging through the storm. After a few more pained steps, he whispered under his breath that a place like that did not suit him. Earlier at the Tiger Pit sect, Ko-Eiko sat alone in her room, seated in front of her desk. A slow sigh escaped her lips as she thought about how the world of martial arts had always been a harsh place defined by survival of the fittest. She reflected that goodness could not afford to be weak, and only the strong could carry their beliefs to the end without compromise. She reminded herself that her father had lived by that principle and passed it down to her. She reached for a scroll resting near her arm and opened it carefully. As she stared at the writing, she admitted quietly in her thoughts that she too had chosen to follow the same path. The scroll revealed a letter of acceptance from the Muram Alliance's Deungcheon Academy. She considered how the academy was directly operated by the Muram Alliance, and accepted candidates from ages 16 to 18, training them into the promising talents who would eventually lead the Kangho. Ko-Eiko let out another long breath and pressed her palms against her face. She admitted to herself that she had taken the entrance exam in secret, and still could not quite believe she had been accepted. Her plan had been to graduate from the academy, gain valuable experience, and use that foundation to help raise her family's standing. However, she clenched her fist tightly and worried about the enormous tuition fee. She thought that if only she had the money, things would be easier. A memory surfaced in her mind of Gu Goryu requesting money back at the banquet. She shook her head firmly and reminded herself that saving the people of the Tiger Pit sect had been more important than anything else. She promised that she would not regret choosing their lives over wealth. She stood up from her chair and opened the window beside her, allowing the cold wind to wash across her face. She exhaled again, and mentioned aloud that she should go out to get some fresh air, hoping it would help her feel better. In the present, Ko-Eiko found herself walking through the streets in the middle of a heavy rainstorm, leading her horse by the reins. She muttered that she did not feel better at all, and then shouted in frustration, asking why the weather was tormenting her as well. The horse beside her began hopping and shaking its head, which caused her temper to rise further. Clenching her teeth, she asked if her horse, Bong, was the only one having a good time while she was at her wit's end. A loud thud echoed nearby, cutting through the rain. Ko-Eiko drew her brows together, and asked what that sound was. She told Bong that they should go and check. When they turned the corner, she instantly spotted the dark pool of blood on the ground. Her voice quivered as she whispered to herself in shock, unable to comprehend the amount she was seeing. She wondered who could possibly lose so much blood. From the deep shadows ahead, Shuji began approaching slowly. The faint outline of his form only became visible when a streak of lightning illuminated the street. Ko-Eiko stepped back in fear and demanded to know if the figure was a person or a ghost. Shuji's voice replied quietly from within the darkness, saying only that he appeared exactly as he was. Ko-Eiko assumed that meant he was a ghost, and stated the conclusion aloud. Shuji looked down at himself in brief confusion, but without offering clarification, he turned around to walk away. Ko-Eiko realized from his reaction that he was a living person. She called out, shouting for him to wait. She reached into her belongings and threw a small pouch near his feet. She explained that it was a wound salve, cheap but useful, and if he needed it, he should use it. She admitted that she did not know what happened to him, and although she could not carelessly involve herself in martial conflicts, she could not ignore someone suffering right in front of her. She added that if he truly did not want it, he could throw it away. For a brief moment, Shuji smirked. He bent down to collect the pouch and examined it quietly. After a moment of silence, he pulled the bag tied to the staff he carried and swung it lightly. Ko became alarmed by his sudden movement and shouted nervously, asking why he was doing that. Shuji tossed the sack at her feet and instructed her flatly to put it on the horse. When he turned and began walking away again, she called after him repeatedly, begging him to stop and explain. She stared at the sack for several seconds, her thoughts racing. From its size and the faint metallic scent mixed with rainwater, she began to fear what might be inside. She wondered anxiously if it contained a severed head. She reasoned that if it truly did, she would have a responsibility to report it to the authorities. She slowly crouched down, reaching out hesitantly while closing her eyes. She carefully opened the sack, bracing herself for something horrific. When she finally looked, she gasped in disbelief. Inside were the Tiger Pit Sec's stolen funds taken by the staff demon. Her breath stalled as realization struck. She whipped her head toward the direction Shuji had gone and spotted him just turning around the next corner. Ko hurried after him, shouting that he should wait and demanding to know how he had recovered that stolen money. She turned the corner, expecting to confront him face to face, but her eyes widened as she found nothing there. Only the puddle of blood remained along with the sack at her feet. Another flash of lightning lit up the street, and Ko stood alone in the rain. She whispered into the storm, her voice unsteady, and asked, "You, what on earth? Who are you?" Shuji deliberately leaped off the roof, landing hard on the ground below. The impact forced a pained groan from his lips. For a few moments, he remained still, gathering his strength before attempting to stand. As he did, he sensed a presence nearby. Instinctively, he grabbed his weapon and threw it into a nearby haystack, narrowing his eyes as he thought to himself that someone, or something, was out there. He wondered who would be wandering around at such an hour. Just as he prepared to leave, a startled voice echoed through the quiet night. Wu Tuyen appeared, eyes wide in confusion before shouting in recognition. His tone shifted immediately when he realized who stood before him. He cried out Shuji's name with genuine relief. Shuji turned his head slightly, recognizing the voice. He sighed inwardly, irritated, thinking that it was that man again. He muttered in his mind that he wasn't in the mood for Wu Tuyen's antics tonight. But Wu Tuyen rushed toward him with excitement, calling out and asking where Shuji had been all this time. Shuji clenched his hand in frustration, muttering to himself that this man was insufferable. Before he could continue the thought, Wu Tuyen reached him and spoke loudly, his voice filled with concern. He called Shuji his lifesaver and said he had been looking for him everywhere, complaining that the meat and rice cakes he had prepared had already gone cold. Shuji clicked his tongue in annoyance, thinking that Wu Tuyen had found a new way to be irritating. Wu Tuyen then noticed the injuries covering Shuji's body and quickly began examining him. His voice rose in alarm as he demanded to know what had happened. Who could have dared harm their youngest comrade? His tone turned fierce, declaring that it was war, no matter who the culprits were. Shuji brushed him off, shoving his hand away and ordering him to stop making noise. He told Wu Tuyen to go to their master and fetch the herbs he had mentioned before. Wu Tuyen blinked in confusion, stammering his agreement before Shuji began listing the ingredients he needed. Poria, dragon's blood, persimmon calyx, fenugreek, flaxseed, piper longum, and longan fruit. Wu Tuyen hurriedly wrote them down, exclaiming that there were far too many to gather at once. He asked in frustration where he was supposed to find all of those ingredients at this hour. Shuji simply replied that he should go to Shu Eika to fetch them. When Wu Tuyen realized who he meant, his eyes widened in disbelief. He repeated the name, Master Shu Eika, the leader of the Howling Tiger Escort Bureau, and immediately panicked. He shouted at Shuji, asking if he had lost his mind. How could he possibly approach someone of that status for herbs? Shuji's response was calm and firm. He said that if Wu Tuyen mentioned it was his request, they would provide what was needed. Wu Tuyen clenched his fists in frustration, muttering that it made no sense. He grumbled that he couldn't even bring himself to hit this stubborn man. As he turned away to leave, he sighed and said he would go anyway, calling it a favor for his lifesaver. He muttered to himself, wondering what exactly he was supposed to say when he arrived. Shuji told him simply to say it was from Shuji, assuring him that they would understand. Wu Tuyen looked back at Shuji for a moment, studying his expression. After a few seconds, he muttered that he might as well claim the stable master sent him instead. As he disappeared around the corner, Shuji began circulating his chi. The air around him grew heavy as the energy flared to life. He evaluated his current strength, noting that his staff demon ranking stood at the 10th step of the bone carapace. Before him, a massive red door began to materialize. He gazed at it solemnly and murmured that in order to open it, he would need to pierce his immune meridian and drain his blood, replacing it with spiritual elixir. The process was dangerous, but he recalled that his acupoints had already been fully opened during his battle with the staff demon. He wondered quietly if he had perhaps lost too much blood. Then, looking toward a lingering spirit nearby, he decided the remaining elixir would be replaced by the soul of the staff demon itself. His gaze hardened as he fixed his eyes on the spirit. The ghost shrieked in terror as Shuji extended his hand, grasping the strand of spiritual essence. The The spirit struggled violently, wailing as Shuji pulled it toward him. Moments later, the resistance faded, and the spirit was absorbed completely. Just then, Wu Tuyen appeared at the corner, calling Shuji's name in shock. His voice trembled as he approached, recalling the strange words Shu Eika had spoken to him earlier. He demanded to know who Shuji truly was. Shuji stood silently, grabbed the sack of ingredients, and coldly told him to be quiet. Wu Tuyen stammered, unsure how to respond, and eventually fell silent. Shuji entered a nearby room and gave his instructions without looking back. He ordered Wu Tuyen not to let anyone enter until he returned, and if something went wrong, to inform Master Gu immediately. Wu Tuyen reacted in disbelief, starting to protest but ultimately staying quiet as he watched Shuji disappear inside. Inside the dimly lit room, Shuji sat down and began meditating. His thoughts drifted to the concept of magic. He reflected that once a person surpassed the skull meridian and reached the stage of dual principles, it became impossible to tell whether their power stemmed from martial cultivation or from magic itself. He thought of Kofu, the founder of the Spear Demon Path, and wondered what had become of him. Perhaps he was still being hunted by the Martial Alliance and the Sado sect, or maybe he still reigned as the martial god general of the Heavenly Demon sect. Shuji questioned if Kofu might be out there searching for disciples like him and Ko-Eiko. His mind wandered further, recalling a memory of his past. He saw himself walking alone across a devastated battlefield. In that vision, he reached the place where his master had once stood. The massive red door appeared again before him, and as he prepared to open it, a familiar voice called out. Ko-Eiko stood behind him, asking if he was truly leaving. He tossed a potato at Shuji, who caught it effortlessly. Ko-Eiko gave a faint smile and told him farewell, addressing him as brother. As the enormous door creaked open, Shuji smiled faintly in return, and whispered that his brother should stay well. A blinding light engulfed him, and the memory faded. Shuji awoke suddenly on the hay where he had been resting. Exhaling deeply, he muttered to himself, wondering if his attempt had succeeded. He sat upright, glancing toward the doorway, and commented that the lazy fool must have kept watch outside. When he opened the door, he found Wu Tuyen asleep on the ground. The door nudged his head, waking him abruptly. The stench of impurities clung heavily to Shuji's body. Wu Tuyen recoiled and shouted in concern, asking if Shuji was all right before gagging at the foul odor that seeped from the room. As Shuji walked away, the sound of falling leaves filled the silent night. His thoughts turned inward once again. He reflected that he had reached the top tier of Li Yun's steps, the ultimate perfected stage recognized by all martial families. Preparation was complete, and now his next target awaited. He leapt upward, stepping lightly on the drifting leaves as he ascended into the air. Dark chi swirled around him, forming into a pair of ethereal wings. Looking down upon the town below, his eyes hardened. He murmured that his next revenge target, after the Zhao clan head, would be the Black Dao sect, the defeated faction of Anhui and one of the pinnacles of the 5 great families. As his chi intensified and the night air trembled, he uttered the final name under his breath, the Namgung clan. Inside the Tiger Pit sect, Ko Genin sat with his wife, Sha Gian, sharing a quiet drink. As he mentioned that the Namgung family had extended an invitation, they were holding the grand banquet earlier than usual that year. Sha Gian immediately questioned why they, of all people, would be invited to a gathering dominated by the great orthodox sects of Anhui. Ko Genin explained that the Zhou family, also known as the Zhao family, the official representatives of Gorei Hyun, had vanished, and it appeared their sect had been selected as a replacement. Sha Gian poured another cup and murmured, though they were innocent in all of it, they could hardly expect warm treatment from the others. Ko Genin agreed, adding soberly that in the world of martial arts, only the logic of power held sway. Weakness invited suffering, regardless of fairness, and before the towering presence of the Namgung family, they were little more than pebbles at the base of a mountain. Before he could finish, Sha Gian gently interrupted, advising him not to dwell on it too heavily, and reminded him of the recent news. Namgung Yul, the family's precious daughter who had enrolled at Deongchun Academy, was returning home. Ko Genin's eyes lit up. Ah, you mean the Sword Blossom, Lady Namgung Yul? Sha Gian confirmed it, and noted that among the wives' circles, rumors swirled that the banquet's true purpose was to showcase their daughter, to present her publicly, to boast, to signal her readiness for alliances. Ko Genin threw his head back and laughed into his cup. I'd be happy if that were the case. I can listen to a man brag about his daughter all day long. He set the cup down and added, more seriously, that in truth, his own Ko-Eiko was in no way inferior to Lady Namgung. Sha Gian blinked. Honey, why would you say that? Ko Genin replied simply, it was the truth. Ko-Eiko lacked nothing in looks, talent, or character. The only thing she lacked, he admitted with quiet bitterness, was worthy parents. He sighed, confessing that as a father, he felt ashamed, and that he needed to push her forward before it was too late. Just as he downed the rest of his drink, a loud voice erupted from the doorway. "Dad! Mom!" Ko-Eiko burst in, breathless and urgent, shouting again as she rushed toward them. "No! Father! Mother!" Ko-Genin beamed, delighted. "Oh, my daughter! It's good to hear you call me Dad again." She ignored the sentiment, unfurling a scroll and thrusting it toward them, declaring it was urgent, and demanded their immediate attention. The moment Ko-Genin's eyes landed on the document, his hands began trembling. What is this? A letter of acceptance to the Deongchun Academy? Shagian covered her mouth, utterly stunned. Goodness, look at this. A perfect score in all subjects. My daughter is the top student. The top student! Ko-Genin leapt up, flung open the window, and bellowed outward. This calls for a celebration. We should hold a grand banquet too. But Ko-Eiko cut him off sharply. There was the matter of tuition. Her parents erupted in unison, insisting she needn't worry at all. Her father vowed he would raise the money, even if it meant selling the very pillars of their sect. Shagian added fervently that Ko-Eiko should focus solely on her studies. Ko-Eiko shook her head, turned, and dragged forward a heavy sack. She dropped and let it spill open. Her father gasped in disbelief. "No way! This is—" She stood tall and declared that they no longer needed to worry. She had brought back every coin required. Several days later, beside a quiet riverside, Shuji and Ko-Eiko found themselves together once more. She stood beneath the shade of a tree while he burned mosquito repellent nearby. She watched him for a long moment, reflecting inwardly that something felt different. Strangely, impossibly, things had begun improving the day Shuji arrived. She walked over, her voice soft but teasing. "My little lucky charm." Leaning in, she added, "I haven't seen you much lately. Where have you been wandering off to? Huh? And has something changed since I last saw you a few days ago?" Shuji remained silent, as though her words hadn't registered. Frustrated, she smacked his back and demanded, "What are you thinking so hard about?" She sat beside him abruptly and pressed again. Why hadn't he answered when she called? Startled by her sudden proximity, Shuji offered a vague reply, just this and that. In truth, he was devising a plan to dismantle the Namgung family. A memory surfaced, his own voice, years ago, recounting how an elder of the Namgung family had colluded with the Zhou family and the Black Path sect to cover up the Tiger Pit sect's brutal persecution. The Namgung family, because they possessed the power, had shielded the conspirators and allowed injustice to fester. He reflected that the Namgung family was a superpower granted autonomy within Anhui, entrusted with maintaining order across sects and clans. Yet even within their ranks, corruption festered. Certain factions turned a blind eye to atrocities among lesser groups, accepting bribes in exchange for silence. One such elder's name appeared on Ko-Eiko's kill list, one of the many who had betrayed him, stabbed him, in his previous life. His eyes narrowed instinctively at the thought. Beside him, Ko-Eiko spoke again, gently. Were the other children still bothering him? Shuji began to deny it, but she cut in, declaring that warnings alone wouldn't suffice. It couldn't be helped. Then she smiled, looking directly at him and asked, "Shuji, do you want to leave with me?" He stiffened. She continued. This time, she had been accepted into Deongchun Academy. Her words overlapped with a ghost from his past, Hu Yeyang's own lament, and as the top student. "But I couldn't go because I didn't have the money. If I had been accepted there, my life would have been very different." Ko-Eiko's voice softened, warm and resolute. "I will definitely enroll in the Deongchun Academy to broaden my horizons, build connections, and then come back. And I want to make our family grow." She leaned down, her tone intimate. "Shuji, you're quiet, diligent, and talented. If you're okay with it, come with me to the Deongchun Academy. Life there will be more comfortable than here." Shuji gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile, and thought to himself that this was the dream she had been denied in her past life. Once everything was settled, she would no longer need him. From then on, she could walk that path alone. Ko-Eiko pressed, waiting. "You'll come with me, right?" At last, Shuji answered, not with certainty, but with conditionality, depending on the situation. She stepped back, crossed her arms, and teased, "What? Playing hard to get? Then I'll take that as a yes for now." She added that Deongchun Academy was far, so if he had anything to settle, debts, obligations, farewells, he ought to do it in advance. And she asked pointedly, "Surely he didn't owe anyone money?" Shuji kept his gaze low, tending the fire, and replied quietly, "He had some debts to collect." Ko-Eiko's eyes widened. "Debts? You have debts?" She seized his arm, voice rising with fierce protectiveness. "Then you have to take care of them. Collect everything you're owed. Got it?" Without waiting for a reply, she spun away, striding toward her horse, and shouted over her shoulder, "No, let's go! I'll collect them all for you!" Shuji rose slowly, watching her retreating figure, and murmured to himself, barely audible, "No matter what, a debt must be collected." His expression darkened, his lips curled into a wide, chilling grin as he whispered, "Every last coin, every last drop of blood, all of it." Few days passed, and the Namgung family estate grew lively as guests arrived to attend the grand banquet. At the entrance, Shu Ika bowed formally when the Tiger Pit sect appeared. She welcomed them respectfully and commented on the length of their journey. Ko Iko returned the bow and replied politely that the escort had worked hard as well. Ko Jinan added his own thanks, stating that their trip had been comfortable thanks to escort Ju. He then suggested that they enter the estate. Behind them, the stable boys from the Tiger Pit sect gazed around in awe at the grandeur of the Namgung family estate. The marble walkways, ornate pillars, and sprawling gardens seemed to stretch endlessly before them. Wu Tuyen's eyes widened in amazement as he muttered, "So this is the Namgung family. It's so big and beautiful, and everyone is so handsome and pretty." Suddenly, loud, excited voices from young women drew their attention. Several girls rushed forward, crowding around Shuji and bombarding him with questions. They asked where he came from, whether he worked alone, and how old he was. They admired his handsome face, remarked on his strong arms, and even offered to wipe the sweat off his body. Shuji thought to himself that their behavior was annoying. Watching enviously from a distance, the stable boys felt bitterness rising. They whispered that he was mean and called him a jerk. One reminded the others that they had agreed to be nice to Shuji, causing Wu Tuyen to groan and admit that he simply could not help himself. As Shuji finally noticed them staring, one of the boys panicked and pointed out that he had seen them. Instantly, Shuji vanished from the crowd of girls and reappeared right in front of the stable boys. He placed his hand firmly on Wu Tuyen's shoulder and spoke quietly, telling him that he would leave the rest to him. Wu Tuyen blinked in confusion and called after him, but Shuji had already vanished again. The disappointed girls glared and demanded to know where the handsome boy had gone. Attempting to salvage the situation, Wu Tuyen rizzed them up and pointed awkwardly to himself and tried to sound charming, but his voice cracked. The girls looked down at him with disgust and walked away while insulting the encounter. After they left, Wu Tuyen stood silently staring at the ground. A tear rolled down his cheek as he muttered Shuji's name and called him a jerk. Later that afternoon at the stables, Shuji watched from atop a carriage roof while a harsh overseer shouted commands. The man scolded the stable boys and reminded them that the banquet would begin soon, calling them lazy bums. He swung a stick violently and struck one of them repeated times while sarcastically questioning whether the boy had lost his mind. He lectured him about the price of the meat he was transporting and insulted him as worthless. The boy curled up and screamed for help. After spitting on him, the overseer complained about being busy and then kicked Stable Boy in the head. He ordered the boy to prepare the sacrifice for the blood oath ceremony and asked whether it had been handled properly. The new stable boy bowed and explained that he had brought the sacrifice in without draining its blood, just as instructed. However, he hesitantly admitted there was a problem. The overseer's face twisted in fury as he demanded to know what problem could possibly exist. The stable boy explained that the wolf they captured was so large that they struggled to move it. The overseer swung his stick again and shouted that they should have grabbed anyone available to help. Terrified, the boy ran off to call the others. The overseer clicked his tongue and muttered that they were useless. Just then, he noticed movement inside one of the carriages when the fabric cover shifted. Assuming the sacrifice was still alive, he reached for his sword and grumbled that the stable boys failed to check if the animal was dead. He threatened that he would cut off one of their legs when they returned. He climbed into the carriage, complaining that he could not even enjoy the banquet because of such bothersome tasks. Inside, he began searching and spoke aloud, asking where the wolf was hiding. He eventually found it and knelt beside it, patting its head. He initially mocked the creature, believing it was merely a wolf cub and wondering why it caused such commotion. Suddenly, the wolf stirred. The overseer stumbled back in shock. He gasped and shouted in disbelief as he realized its true, enormous size. Then he began laughing hysterically, thrilled by the discovery. He exclaimed that a wolf of this magnitude would make the blood oath ceremony a tremendous success and proudly declared that, for once, the incompetent workers had accidentally achieved something valuable. He imagined how pleased the family head would be. Unbeknownst to him, a rope quietly slid around his neck from behind. Shuji, who had been hiding in the shadows, pulled the rope tight and hoisted the man upward. The overseer struggled desperately and tried to beg for help. Shuji spoke calmly from behind a hanging slab of meat, explaining that he was curious about the internal structure of the Namgung family manor. The man tried to resist, gritting his teeth and attempting to speak through the pressure on his throat, but Shuji smirked into the darkness and pulled harder. Shuji told him that he did not actually need him to talk. The man eventually went limp, and his body collapsed. A moment later, the man's spirit emerged beside the corpse. Shuji released the rope, grabbed the spirit by the head, and stared coldly at the fallen body. He remarked that a dead man was more honest than a living one. Outside the carriage, loud voices echoed. Several Namgung stable boys dragged the Tiger Pit stable hands across the yard, demanding their help. Wu Tuyen struggled against the hold and shouted insistently that they were not members of the Namgung family. He identified their group loudly as the Tiger Pit. The Namgung stable boy apologized profusely and promised that he would give them meat and food later if they helped him move a single wolf. Wu Tuyen pushed him away, annoyed by the demand, while the Namgung boy looked around and wondered aloud where a certain warrior had gone. He bumped into another Namgung stable boy who immediately scolded him for standing around. The boy panicked and agreed quickly. After a short pause, several of them worked together and managed to lift the enormous wolf, which hung upside down on a thick pole. They counted loudly in unison before staggering forward. Wu Tuyen complained loudly, questioning why he was even being forced to participate. The Namgung stable boy thanked him again and promised a reward for his help. Wu Tuyen demanded that he keep his word without hesitation and asked why the wolf was so heavy, wondering if it had given birth. The Namgung boy nervously offered 4 servings of meat as compensation. Wu Tuyen shouted his agreement. As the grand banquet began, servants moved swiftly between tables, serving steaming delicacies to the assembled guests. From the highest building of the Namgung estate, 2 figures observed the scene below from a balcony. One of them was an elderly man reclining comfortably in a rocking chair. He was known as the Sword King, Namgung Cheon, the former head of the Namgung family. He was seen idly watching the activity and remarked that he was bored. Standing beside him was Namgung Pa, the current head of the Namgung family. He commented to his father that the atmosphere within Anhui remained unsettled due to the annihilation of the Zhou family, and explained that if the Sword King revealed himself during these times, it would restore stability. Namgung Cheon sighed, noting that he had heard the same argument before. Namgung Pa pressed on, explaining that the Zhou family was undeniably a collateral branch of the Namgung lineage, led by Zhou Yangjia, a distant relative of Namgung Pengsang, who remained a respected authority within the Council of Elders. The Sword King responded that he knew this already and recalled seeing Zhou Yangjia's face several times, commenting that the boy had been quite bright. Namgung Pa continued, pointing out that now that the truth had spread that Zhou Yangjia had colluded with the Black Path sect, the Namgung family needed to prove that, as a pillar of the righteous path, they held no shame. Namgung Cheon dismissed the seriousness, stating that a few weaklings dying among themselves should not matter, and pointed out that his son often became overly emotional about trivial matters. Namgung Pa groaned and complained that comparing the Zhou family and the Black Path sect to crickets was ridiculous, especially since the incident he referenced happened long ago. Their exchange was interrupted when Namgung Yul, the eldest daughter of the Namgung family, arrived and bowed. She announced that it was almost time to enter the banquet hall. Namgung Pa's face brightened immediately as he praised his daughter, asking his father whether she had grown beautifully. The Sword King smiled, asking if she had found any suitable husband material at the academy. Namgung Pa leaned forward in disbelief, shouting into his father's ear that she was too young to worry about marriage already. Namgung Cheon waved a dismissive hand, complaining about the noise. Namgung Yul stated calmly that her grandfather was correct, explaining that she should marry soon and become an asset to the family. Namgung Pa hesitated and admitted that thinking about marriage already felt too early. His face shifted into panic as he suddenly asked if she was secretly seeing someone. She immediately denied this. Namgung Yul then added that after graduation, the situation might change, and she was only preparing in advance. Her grandfather chimed in loudly, advising her to look farther away for a groom, rather than choosing bland and dull-witted boys nearby. Namgung Pa shouted back that he would be the one to pick her husband. Namgung Cheon scoffed, claiming his son would only find another boring man. Trying to change the subject, Namgung Pa reminded his daughter about the approaching blood oath ceremony. She acknowledged it while he explained the ritual thoroughly. He stated that the blood of a large and fierce beast would be drained into a copper tray, and then drunk in turns by those who wished to form an alliance. He placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder, explaining that she would wield the family's sacred sword to draw the blood, emphasizing that it was the most important role in the ceremony. Namgung Yul vowed to do her best in order to elevate the family's prestige. Namgung Pa then suggested that they should attend the banquet immediately and told his father to rise. As he looked down below, his attention caught sight of someone and he muttered with frustration. He bowed quickly to his father, excused himself, and announced he would go ahead. Before entering through the door, he turned to his daughter and strongly warned her that she could not allow anyone to take the sword from her. Confused, Namgung Yul looked at her sacred weapon and muttered softly, wondering why that would ever happen. Earlier down at the banquet level, the Tiger Pit sect's arrival had drawn attention. A guest looked back toward them, whispering that they must have been invited this time instead of the Zhou family. He had assumed the Tiger Pit sect had been responsible for eliminating the Zhou family and the Black Path sect, but seeing them here suggested otherwise. Another man sitting nearby berated him, insisting he say something sensible, adding that the Tiger Pit sect possessed neither money nor power and could not possibly have destroyed the Zhou family or Black Path sect. The two then burst into laughter. Ko Genan clenched his fists tightly when he overheard their mockery, his anger visible on his face. Ko Eiko noticed her father's expression and silently whispered concern under her breath. Suddenly, a jovial voice echoed from behind them, asking why everyone appeared so grim. Both Ko Genan and Ko Eiko turned to find an elderly man stroking his long beard with amusement. He asked rhetorically whether they were unhappy with the terms of the pledge, claiming he had worked hard on them. Guests around the hall looked at him with forced smiles. They start glazing him and expressing relief under Namgung protection. This man was Namgung Pangsang, the elder of the fire palace of the Namgung family. The terms of the pledge he authored stated that all righteous organizations gathered would come under the Namgung family, that the Namgung family would share portions of their secret arts with them, and that each organization would pay protection fees every quarter. Though the guests publicly smiled, internally they cursed him as a clever and greedy old fox. Someone loudly declared how incredible it felt to be chosen to learn the Namgung family's secret arts, laughing at his own statement. Pangsang smirked in approval and then turned toward the Tiger Pit sect. He asked jokingly whether this was the rumored Tiger Pit sect leader. Ko Genan and his daughter bowed politely, and Ko Genan expressed that it was an honor to meet him. Pangsang chuckled and placed his hand heavily on Ko Genan's shoulder, insisting there was no need for honor because they would be seeing each other often. He remarked that the incident with the Zhou family was unfortunate and then tightened his grip on Ko Genan's shoulder. Spiritual energy flared as he mocked him, repeating that he had not accused him. He explained that he invited them precisely because he trusted them. He grinned wickedly and pointed out that the blood oath would be a beneficial opportunity for the Tiger Pit sect. With an even firmer grip, he added that once they learned the Namgung family's secret sword arts, their sect would grow and easily pay protection fees with profit remaining. His gaze slowly shifted to Ko Eiko, and he cruelly mentioned that since her previous arranged marriage had collapsed, she might be better off becoming a concubine of a powerful older man. He suggested that such an arrangement was popular among young people lately, adding that it was better than becoming the official wife of an incompetent boy. He lifted his hand toward her chest, reaching toward her boobies. Before he could touch her, a stern voice cut sharply through the air.
What are you doing over there?
Namgung Pa appeared and flared his own spiritual energy, instantly dispersing Pangsang's suppressed energy. Pangsang staggered back in surprise and addressed him formally. Internally, he clicked his tongue and growled that the family head was an annoying spoilsport. He claimed aloud that it was nothing important, simply having exchanged a few words after noticing a familiar face. Namgung Pa stared down at him coldly and insisted that he would decide the importance, demanding again to know what had happened. Pangsang burst into manic laughter in response.
The family head seems on edge right before the big event.
He then added loudly that the girl had questions about the pledge and he was merely offering advice, asking Ko Genan to confirm. Ko Genan bowed and stuttered that it was true. Pangsang assured Namgung Pa that everything was harmless and politely excused himself. As he passed Ko Genan, he whispered that they would finish the conversation they could not have today another time. When he finally left, Namgung Pa exhaled deeply in relief. He apologized sincerely on behalf of the elder's rudeness. Ko Genan attempted to dismiss the apology, but Namgung Pa insisted that they were to become strong allies and that decency demanded such apologies. He then turned to Ko Eiko and bowed, apologizing for the elder's inappropriate remarks. She returned the bow respectfully and assured him she was fine. Namgung Pa then silently evaluated Ko Eiko, remembering that she had placed first in the entrance exam of Daeung Chenan Academy. He concluded internally that her foundations were excellent and that she might become a worthy rival and friend to his daughter. He thanked her aloud and looked up to judge the time. Right on cue, Namgung Yul appeared behind him and announced her presence. Namgung Pa introduced her to Ko Eiko, asking them to greet one another. Both bowed and exchanged names respectfully. Namgung Yul observed internally that this was the girl who had ranked first in the exam. Ko Eiko narrowed her eyes slightly as she recognized Namgung Yul as the sword flower. Namgung Pa asked his daughter whether preparations were complete, and she confirmed that they were. He glanced at the massive wolf tied above and stated that at last, the moment had arrived. He declared aloud, "Now, at last, it is time for the blood oath." Later that night, as darkness fell over the estate, Namgung Pa began to climb the stairs leading to the platform where the wolf was tied. He stopped halfway up, turned around, and addressed the gathered guests with a booming voice that carried across the entire courtyard. He offered his sincere thanks to all the heroic comrades within Anhui province who had assembled for this occasion. Some of the guests were shocked into awed silence by the display of his powerful chi. Namgung Pa continued his speech, reminding everyone present that they had all taken up their swords for the beliefs of justice and balance. He spoke of harsh realities. In the north, the apostles wreaked havoc. In the east, barbarians threatened. And in the west, the demonic cult ran rampant. Meanwhile, the power of the Marim Alliance, which should be stopping these threats, grew weaker by the day. Therefore, he declared, starting with this oath, they would become one and protect the justice and balance they had defended for generations. Following this powerful declaration, the guests erupted into thunderous cheers, chanting the Namgung clan name repeatedly. The Namgung warriors struck the taiko drums, signaling the beginning of the blood oath ceremony. Namgung Yul slowly ascended the stairs as the drum beats echoed throughout the area. When she reached the halfway point, she met her father, who simply told her to proceed. She nodded, then suddenly leapt forward to the top platform. There, she grasped her sword, closed her eyes, and slowly drew the blade, thinking to herself that the sword of Namgung was her sword. She swung it through the air, vowing silently that today, here, she would give her all and bring glory to the name of Namgung. She opened her eyes wide and began performing intricate sword techniques, her movements precise and graceful. After completing her forms, she paused and stood still, thinking that now came the final part of the ceremony. She pointed her sword toward the wolf tied in the middle of the platform, determined to put her all into this final act. She jumped forward, performing the peerless sword of the vast sky technique, the heavenly dance, single line. But as the tip of her sword was about to reach the wolf's neck, the supposedly dead creature moved. A man covered in blood grinned from within, and suddenly a hand emerged from inside the wolf. As Namgung Yul's sword was about to strike the neck, a topless, bloodied man wearing a wolf headdress reached toward her. As his hand was about to make contact, her gaze turned toward him, and she suddenly recalled her father's words from earlier. "Yul, the sword, you can't let anyone take it." The man grabbed her neck and lifted her up into the air. Namgung Yul was visibly shocked and confused, her mind racing. What had just happened? A person emerging from inside a wolf's stomach? No way. Was this a dream? She began to cry as she tried to process the impossible situation, then realized the choking sensation was real. More importantly, where was the holy sword? She looked ahead and saw the sword hanging in midair about to fall. The man grabbed it and placed it right next to her neck. She groaned as she stared at the blade pressed against her skin. The man, who was Shuji, spoke coldly. "I'm going to press your pressure points now. If you struggle, I'll cut off your ear first." Everything sank into Yul's mind, and she began screaming loudly. Her father, who had been descending the stairs, immediately turned his head back at the sound. The warriors below began asking what had happened, with some insisting they had seen a person emerge from the wolf, while others dismissed it as guts spilling out. But Namgung Pa flared his chi and rushed upward, sensing that Yul's energy was scattered and wondering what on earth had happened up there. Suddenly, the sheath of his daughter's sword fell down onto the stairs, and he immediately recognized it as the sheath of the holy sword. Then a loud voice echoed from the platform above. "Listen up, you bastards of the Namgung clan." As Namgung Pa looked up, he saw his daughter being held hostage and shouted her name in horror. He called Shuji a murderous bastard and demanded he release his daughter immediately. Shuji began to speak, saying he had two demands, but Namgung Pa cut him off, shouting that the fiend should let go of his daughter first. Suddenly, someone appeared right next to Namgung Pa and told him to be quiet for a moment because he couldn't hear what Shuji was saying. It was Namgung Cheon. Namgung Pa shouted at his father, but Namgung Cheon spoke calmly, advising his son not to act rashly. He pointed out that even after inheriting the position of family head, he still hadn't fixed that habit. If Shuji had intended to kill her, he would have done it right away. He must want something, which was why he was up there. Shuji smirked and complimented the old man's cleverness. Namgung Cheon thanked him. Shuji then leaned forward as he looked at Yul, and warned that if anyone tried to interrupt him again, he would sever the girl's neck first. Namgung Pa gritted his teeth as he glared up at Shuji. Shuji resumed speaking. "As I said before, I have two demands. First, today's blood oath is voided, because it is unfair. The Namgung clan, known as the Great Pillar of the Righteous Faction, is engaging in such a lowly, unfair contract. That is why the great cause cannot stand. Second, the one who created this treaty must be killed. If you send that person up to this altar, I will release this girl without a single scratch." Namgung Pa raised his hand, asking for permission to speak. Shuji nodded at him. Namgung Pa spoke, saying the treaty would be revised fairly, but killing the one who created the treaty was not acceptable. Before he could finish, Shuji cut him off with a grin, and suggested that before Namgung Pa said it was not acceptable, he should ask for his opinion first. Down below, Namgung Pangsang stepped forward and shouted at Shuji, calling him a fiend and asking if he thought the Namgung clan would be swayed by his cunning, silver tongue. Shuji coldly responded that if Pangsang came up, he would release the woman unharmed. Pangsang shouted back, calling Shuji a crazy bastard, and accusing him of planning a hostage exchange where he would seal his martial arts, calling it nonsense. Shuji spoke out loud, confused. "When did I say you had to seal your martial arts?" Pangsang was taken aback, asking what he had just said. Shuji responded that he didn't have to seal his martial arts, because he could just beat him to death. He told Pangsang to stop talking nonsense and get up there, calling him Snake Eyes.